The cruelest twist, the man who bought her was still more human than the family who raised her. That's what makes this story hit like a truck. Serafina's father sells her mother prepares her to be used, and the mafia boss she was taught to fear turns out to be the first person who actually sees her pain. Then the script gets even darker. Her own father starts setting up attacks on his younger daughters just to manipulate the marriage and regain power. At that point, this stops being a love story or a mafia drama. It becomes a war between blood and betrayal.
Subject Dominic Varley's empire was a construct of weaponized fear and agreements ratified by force. His control was absolute until the introduction of a new variable, a bride, who recoiled from his proximity. The union was designed as a clinical transaction for strategic gain. Yet the asset, Serafina Vale, presented not as a prize, but as a sacrificial object. This realization introduced a severe conflict in the subject's psyche. Execute the contract as written, or dismantle the very pathology that defined him. This analysis documents the subsequent psychological fallout. The Armory Club, a controlled environment in Lower Manhattan, served to incubate sociopathic ambition. Within this nexus sat Dominic Varley, exhibiting hypervigilance, his gaze a method of panoramic surveillance. He had maintained control over this ecosystem for 6 years. "Your agitation is palpable," observed Marcus Chen, the subject's advisor and external conscience. "A significant event." "It is merely a signature," Varley stated, his affect blunted. "Another contract, with the addendum of a bride." The subject remained non-responsive. The matrimonial contract was the result of a 90-day coercive campaign. The Vale family held dominion over 5 ports critical to Varley's expansion. Facing insolvency, Serafina's father, Aldo Vale, offered his daughter as human collateral. "Have you had prior contact with Serafina?" Marcus inquired. "Brief encounter 2 years prior." The subject's memory showed a deficit concerning her. "She was nonverbal, and you proceed?" "It is a tactical acquisition. The female is an incidental clause." The rationalization showed signs of cognitive dissonance. The subject's entire operational model was built on such remorseless logic. Emotion was a corrupting data point, a vulnerability instilled by a paternal figure who viewed progeny as instruments and affection as a design flaw. Aldo Vale entered, his somatic presentation one of chronic distress masked by expensive attire. Varley. His handshake was a compensatory gesture, an attempt to project a power he no longer possessed. "All arrangements are finalized. Serafina is in position. My legal counsel approved the terms." Aldo's facial expression was an incongruent mask, his eyes lacking effective warmth. "You will control the shipping routes within 48 hours, and Serafina. She is cognizant of her functions." A discordant note in the phrasing triggered a brief dissonance in Dominic, which he actively suppressed. "Our transaction is complete." "Almost," Aldo indicated the elevator. "The ceremony is in 20 minutes, a closed proceeding as specified." Dominic gave a curt affirmation. Minimal observation was a key control parameter. Upon arrival, he confronted a profoundly disorienting scene. The penthouse was a bizarre simulacrum of a chapel. White flora and low light created a sterile veneer. The assembled observers ceased vocalizations upon his entry. He noted his security head Victor and an aunt, Teresa, whose expression communicated deep distress. The remaining individuals were Vales, their terror poorly concealed. Optimal. Fear is a predictable variable. An older female, presumably Aldo's spouse, approached. "Mr. Varley, I am Catherine Vale." "Mrs. Vale." His acknowledgement was minimal. "Serafina's arrival is imminent." "She is simply..." Catherine's hands displayed extreme tension. "She is experiencing acute situational distress." "The parameters of this agreement are understood by all parties." Dominic's tone was clinical. Her compliance is expected. Catherine exhibited a visible, startled response. She understands her duty. The term registered as a negative somatic marker in Dominic's gut, an unclassifiable sensation. Marcus offered a beverage, which the subject declined. The officiant? Judge Morrison is present, a concession to Aldo, Marcus stated quietly. Is this course of action fixed? An exit is still... It is concluded, Dominic interrupted. The contract is executed. Contracts can be rescinded, Dominic pivoted. Why are you presenting opposition? Because in 2 decades of observation, I have never seen you this dissociated from a primary action. Marcus maintained eye contact. This is not cargo, this is a human subject. A subject who consented to the parameters. Did she? Marcus countered. Or was consent manufactured by her father? Before a rebuttal could be formed, a potent new stimulus altered the room's dynamic. His focus locked on a figure in a doorway. His autonomic nervous system responded with momentary apnea. Previously a non-salient memory, Serafina Vale now presented as a powerful visual. A simple white garment seemed to absorb her. Her pallor was extreme. Her eyes, however, were the primary locus of information. They displayed profound, systemic terror, a generalized fear response to the environment itself. She scanned the space with the hypervigilance of a trapped organism. Her hands constricted a bouquet, knuckles blanched. When her mother attempted physical contact, Serafina's violent recoil silenced the entire room. This was not normative prenuptial anxiety. It was a clinical display of systemic terror. A nascent protective impulse emerged in Dominic, which he immediately suppressed with practiced efficiency. This was the transaction. Her fear was an externality. Yet as Aldo applied physical force to guide her, Serafina's body faltered. His grip became coercive, and Dominic observed a self-injurious act. She bit her lip, drawing blood. Severe psychomotor tremors began. The ceremony proceeded in a dissociative fog, the judge's words a meaningless audio stream. Dominic's own vows were recited by rote. When the officiant addressed Serafina, the subsequent silence was profound. Her vocalization fractured. I do. The sound was one of complete psychological capitulation. The ritual called for a kiss. As Dominic initiated the movement, Serafina executed a sharp avoidance maneuver. Her body was rigid with catatonia. A smattering of discordant applause followed. Aldo was gratified. Catherine was devastated. And Serafina appeared to be in a state of advanced disintegration. The reception was truncated as Dominic had forbidden any celebratory signifiers. The aftermath consisted of an hour of non-communication, while Serafina remained in a state of dissociative immobility. Dominic engaged in covert observation from a distance. She was unresponsive, even to her mother, whose whispered words elicited lacrimation that Serafina actively suppressed. She is terrified of you, Victor stated, materializing at his side. She has no data on me. That is likely the causal factor. Victor's long tenure permitted such analysis. You are aware of your own mythology. Gossip is irrelevant. It is not. Not when your new wife perceives you as her executioner. The subject's jaw muscles contracted. She will be conditioned? Will she? Victor's question introduced significant doubt. Or will her suffering merely become less overt? Before Dominic could respond, Aldo appeared, exhibiting signs of intoxication. Barley, my congratulations. I trust you'll find my girl satisfactory. The objectifying language ignited a cold rage in Dominic. The shipping lanes are yours." Aldo's satisfaction intensified. "The instruments are prepared, and Serafina, she is delivered with a complete set of operating instructions." Her progenitor, Aldo, continued to describe her not as kin, but as an artifact, engineered for compliance. He enumerated her functions as though reading a technical manual. A wave of profound disgust washed over Dominic, his fists clenching involuntarily. His curt dismissal, "Our business is concluded," failed to halt the exchange. Aldo's laughter finalized it. As the man departed, a raw, violent impulse seized Dominic. His lieutenant, Victor, offered a futile placation. "Boss, allow a refractory period." But Dominic's reply, "I understand this protocol," was a clear self-deception. He was an architect, reviewing a blueprint he could no longer comprehend. He had anticipated a strategic partner for his violent chessboard, a counterpart forged in the same brutal conditions. He received a subject in a state of acute terror whose perception painted him as the antagonist from her deepest anxieties. A psychological profile he found disturbingly accurate. As the evening's facade crumbled, his guests' accolades morphed into muted concerns. Marcus, a man of cold pragmatism, delivered his clinical assessment in a low tone. "I will state this only once. The girl is psychologically fractured. Whatever you plan for tonight is not your concern. It becomes my concern when I observe actions that will inflict permanent trauma." Marcus's stare was unyielding. "You secured the shipping lanes. The objective is met. Do not destroy her psyche simply because you possess the power to do so. Even pathologies like ours have defined boundaries. Leave." Marcus's departure was a silent judgment that created a vacuum in the room. Soon, only Dominic, Serafina, and Victor remained. Registering the oppressive atmosphere, Victor tactically withdrew, citing security protocols. A profound, suffocating silence descended. Serafina sat immobilized, her focus locked on the gold band on her finger, a restraint Dominic had chosen with clinical detachment. Her respiration was a rapid, shallow sign of hyperarousal. Dominic approached her slowly, mirroring a predator stalking trapped prey. "It is time." His voice was a trigger, and she flinched, rising with visible motor instability. She would not engage in eye contact. Perhaps she was incapable of it. His black Mercedes was waiting, a purring symbol of his control. Victor opened the door, and Serafina retreated into the rear cabin, pressing herself against the far window. Dominic followed, the door closing with the solid finality of a vault. They traversed Manhattan in a state of absolute stillness. The city's lights moved across her face, revealing the lacrimation tracks she no longer tried to hide. It was the expression of complete psychological surrender. "Serafina?" His voice fractured the silence. She jolted. "Look at me." With excruciating deliberation, she complied. Her eyes met his for the first time since the ceremony, and the profound affective flattening within them struck him like a physical impact. It was not merely fear, but a chilling resignation, an acceptance of the trauma she was certain was imminent. "I will not harm you." The words were empty stimuli against her conditioning. "Do you comprehend? I am not—" "I comprehend my function," she interrupted, her voice a brittle, robotic whisper. My mother was clear. I know what is required of me. The lifeless, mechanical quality of her speech twisted in his gut. What, specifically, were her instructions? That I belong to you now, that I must. Her voice frayed, her breathing hitched. That my purpose is to obey your directives. That my duty is to satisfy you. to never offer resistance, to be, her voice broke, to be compliant. A cold rage, not at her but at Aldo and her mother, manifested within Dominic. They had rendered her a contractual term, conditioning her to believe compliance was her only value. They conditioned you to believe you are my property. Is that accurate? Her frightened gaze remained on his. You acquired me. My father set the terms. You received the shipping lanes, and you receive me. My family is secure. That is the transaction, Serafina. I am not a fool, Mr. Varley. Tears now streamed unchecked down her face. I know the behaviors of men in your world. I have heard the stories. I know what you represent, and I know I have no agency. So I will perform my duties. I will be what you require. Her voice then cracked into a raw, desperate appeal. Just please, do not inflict more pain than is necessary. The car stopped before Dominic's building, a dark edifice of glass and steel. He usually viewed it with pride. Tonight, it registered as a correctional facility. Victor opened her door. Serafina stood on trembling limbs. And as Dominic's hand made contact with her elbow, she recoiled with such violence she nearly lost her balance. They ascended in the private elevator, enveloped in a suffocating quiet. Serafina's gaze was fixed on the floor, marking the seconds of this final approach. The doors opened to his residence, a stark panorama of concrete, brick, and glass overlooking the Hudson. It was an environment engineered to intimidate. Through her terror, Dominic perceived only its desolate coldness. She halted at the entrance, a statue of pure dread. The bedrooms are in that direction, Dominic indicated. Your possessions are in the closet, she offered a minute, non-verbal nod. Are you hungry? I can arrange for sustenance. Another silent gesture of acquiescence. She gave him no response. A wave of frustration grew in Dominic. He managed lethal negotiations, but was unequipped for this fractured subject who saw a monster in his features. Perhaps she was only seeing the reality. Serafina. He tried to soften his tone, but it emerged with a sharp edge. You must eat. You barely consumed anything at dinner. I have no appetite, she stated, her voice a hollow echo. When was your last nutritional intake? Silence was her reply. Serafina. Yesterday morning, she admitted, her tone lifeless. I was unable. I have been ill since I was informed of the arrangement. Food just... She wrapped her arms around her torso. It is inconsequential. I am fine. She was anything but fine. A severe tremor passed through her, her teeth chattering. When Dominic moved toward her, she scrambled backward until she made contact with the wall. Primal panic flared in her eyes. He stopped, raising his hands, palms forward. I am not going to touch you. But you will, she whispered as new tears fell. It is the expected protocol. That is the purpose of tonight, yes? The agreement, it requires, she choked on the word, consummation. Dominic voiced the term she could not, and observed her flinch at the sound. So that constitutes your understanding of this. And that was the cold, unspoken foundation of their union. The contract contained clauses on lineage and obligations, duties to be executed with or without consent. Dominic had barely registered them, viewing them as archaic formalities. He had incorrectly assessed Serafina as an active participant who understood the dynamic, who had her own agenda. He never anticipated this magnitude of sheer, soul-deep terror. He never imagined he would feel like a predator cornering its prey. Go to your room, he said at last. Shower, change your clothes. I will have food brought to you. And after that? Her voice was a ghost. Then you will eat and you will sleep. Nothing else. She was not persuaded. My mother said the first night is pivotal, that we have to. The shaking worsened. She said if I fail, my father loses everything, that you could nullify the deal, that our family would be. Your mother is misinformed. Dominic's voice was sharper than he intended. Go to your bedroom, Serafina. Go. She vanished, the door clicking shut behind her. Dominic stood alone in his vast, sterile room, resisting an impulse to destroy something. The entire transaction, the agreement, the ceremony, the union, had appeared so linear on paper. Acquire the roots, secure an alliance, take a wife, consolidate power. He had never factored in that the bride would be a person. His phone vibrated. It was Marcus. So, how is the marital arrangement? The inquiry was a calculated provocation. Not ideal. Dominic walked to the window. She is afraid of me. She is in a state of absolute terror. She believes I am going to. He could not complete the thought. Well, will you? Marcus shot back. For God's sake, Marcus. I ask because you signed a document granting you that authority, and I know you. Everything is leverage. Every person is an asset. So, as your associate, what is your next course of action? Dominic closed his eyes. I do not know. You should determine it quickly because that girl isn't a clause in a contract. She is human. If you treat her like an asset, you will shatter her, and likely yourself. When did you become my conscience? Since I observed you devolve into someone I barely recognize over these past 5 years. You once had ethical lines you would not cross. Dom, ensure this does not become one of them. Marcus ended the call. Dominic had food delivered that he knew Serafina would not consume. When it arrived, he knocked on her door. Nothing. Serafina, I have left sustenance here for you. You should eat. Still, only silence responded. He waited, hearing only the apartment's clinical quiet, then withdrew. An hour later, he checked again. The tray was undisturbed. Dominic spent the night in his office, focusing on data he had memorized, anything to evade the reality of the terrified subject in his home. At dawn, he was no closer to a solution. After he departed, a funereal silence settled over the penthouse. Her door remained closed. The food he had left was gone, but whether it was consumed or discarded was unknown. His day was a relentless sequence of events. Legal consultations, security updates with Victor, and the clinical neutralization of a supplier. Dominic performed his role flawlessly, yet his cognitive processes were elsewhere. Later that night, he discovered Serafina in the kitchen. In casual clothing, she appeared startlingly young. With her hair still damp, she was ineptly attempting to cook. Every motion she made was tentative and lacking confidence. You have no requirement to do this. His words broke the stillness. She flinched severely. The knife rattled at the counter. I employ staff for this. I wanted to, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the ruined vegetables. I assumed I should. My mother conditioned me that it was my function to. Your mother was incorrect about numerous things. Serafina could only wring her hands together. I don't know what is required of me. When Dominic moved closer, she shrank away, the island serving as a barrier between them. So conditioned to fear, so prepared to flee. I need you to look at me and not perceive a threat. I'm trying, she breathed, her voice on the verge of fracturing. Truly, I am, but I feel disoriented. I have no understanding of my purpose in this environment. She shielded her face from him. This life is completely foreign. I don't comprehend the protocols of a wife or your needs. I'm terrified I will fail you, and then you will... I will what? I don't know. The confession burst from her throat. I can't anticipate how you will react if I am inadequate. Will you discard me? Will you harm me? There are no rules here. Just this suffocating anxiety, this enclosure. I can't breathe. Her speech deteriorated into a full-scale panic attack, each ragged inhalation causing her body to convulse. The subject's movement was predicated on pure autonomic response. As he advanced, she recoiled with such force she impacted the counter. Do not make contact, she vocalized. I cannot. I simply cannot. She collapsed, assuming a fetal position against the cabinetry, exhibiting signs of hyperventilation. The presentation was that of a complete psychic fracture, her cognition overwhelmed by acute terror. Dominic remained static, an observer to her mental disintegration, his own control rendered inert. His pathology compelled him to dominate the situation, to neutralize her distress. Yet he was the primary stressor. One cannot command away a primal fear response. Serafina, his tone was low, carefully modulated. Observe me. I require you to open your eyes. The subject was non-compliant. Her eyelids remained sealed, lacrimal fluid creating channels on her skin as she trembled. Physical contact will not be initiated. I am maintaining my position. You are in a secure environment. Do you comprehend? You are secure. I am not, she articulated between dysregulated breaths. I will never be secure. I am your property. I was bartered by my father and acquired by you. I possess no agency, no egress. I cannot respire. Dominic lowered himself to the floor, maintaining a significant interpersonal distance. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. Replicate my pattern. He demonstrated, his own respiration deep and regulated. After a period, she attempted to mimic his cadence. A lengthy pause filled the space before her breathing began to stabilize, the apex of the panic response starting to recede. My apologies. Her gaze was fixed on the floor tile. I am profoundly sorry. I should not have. The instructions were to remain silent, to be compliant, to present no complication. But I am failing. The self-recriminations continued in a steady stream. But Serafina. He allowed the silence to extend until her gaze finally met his. What precisely was the narrative they provided you about me? She gnawed her lower lip. That you are a high-threat individual, that you have committed homicides, that the city is conditioned to fear you, that you always achieve your objectives, irrespective of the cost, that if I am unable... Her vocalization ceased. If you are not able to what? If I cannot produce a satisfactory outcome for you, you may destroy my family. The contract grants you that authority. My function is to ensure this alliance succeeds. A sharp, cold rage activated in Dominic. Aldo had weaponized his daughter's fear, conditioning her to believe her sole value was in placating a perceived monster. Your family instrumentalized you, he stated, his voice incisive. They placed you in an untenable position and labeled it duty. They framed you as their deliverance. That is not protection, Serafina. That is pathological cowardice. They had no alternative. We were losing everything. My father's debts, legal entanglements, the threats from... She terminated her sentence, realizing the disclosure. From what entity? She responded only with a negative head movement. Serafina, who was threatening your family? It is no longer relevant. You control the shipping lanes. You can provide protection from any party who... Once again, she fell silent. For Dominic, the data points were assembling into a grotesque profile. Her father was not merely insolvent, he was targeted by powerful adversaries. Instead of confronting them, he had deployed his daughter as a human shield. He sought to protect us. He was protecting himself. Do not, she trembled. Please do not articulate that. He is my father. He is still... She could not complete the rationalization. They both understood the clinical truth. Aldo Valle had sacrificed his offspring to preserve himself, cloaking the transaction in the language of honor and affection. What is your age? The inquiry was abrupt. 22. And this arrangement? What is the duration of its planning stage? The exact timeline is unknown to me. Several months. I was informed only 2 weeks ago. She drew her knees tighter to her chest. My mother detailed the variables, the debt, the threats, the marital stipulations. She presented this as the singular solution, my obligation as the eldest. You have siblings? 2 younger sisters. They are still in academia. A new affect ignited in her eyes, one of intense defensiveness. They cannot be informed. They believe I am entering a marriage for love, because this is... She emitted a harsh laugh. A romantic arrangement. And what is their knowledge of me? Nothing factual, only that you are powerful and affluent. My mother constructed a narrative that was almost socially acceptable. Serafina wiped at her face with her sleeve. They are unaware of your actual enterprises, of your true nature. And what is my nature? She made direct eye contact, and in her pupils Dominic saw a reflection of his own persona, the architect of a violent enterprise, a predator, a figure of universal fear, a man who had just acquired a terrorized young woman for her strategic value. I do not know, she whispered. That is the most terrifying variable. I do not know who you are, what you desire, or what you are capable of. I only know there is no escape. The statement remained between them, a cold, immutable diagnosis. Dominic rose to his feet slowly. Stand. Fear registered in her eyes, but she complied, rising on unsteady limbs. Return to your room. Please, Serafina, just go to your room. Engage the lock. I will occupy the guest suite. He produced his phone. I am ordering sustenance, proper food, not what that was. It will be placed outside your door. You are instructed to consume all of it. Then you will sleep. That is the complete directive. No duties, no contract, no performance expectations. Only sleep. Is that understood? She gave a nearly imperceptible nod, as if incapable of processing the instruction. Tomorrow, we will review the actual parameters of this arrangement, the protocols. But for tonight, your sole function is to rest. He held her gaze for a moment. Are you capable of executing that function? I believe so. Good. Now go. And she departed. This time, the sound of the lock engaging felt less like imprisonment and more like a temporary cessation of threat. Dominic ordered rations for 3 individuals, selecting items he hypothesized she might consume. He placed it outside her door and rapped his knuckles once. He detected her retrieving it 20 minutes later. After an hour, he verified the tray was removed. A minor tactical success. He remained in the guest room, analyzing the ceiling, reevaluating every strategic decision. The transaction was complete. The shipping lanes were secured. He had acquired the asset, or so his initial assessment concluded. What he had actually obtained was a psychologically damaged young woman, sold to preserve a coward. The entire arrangement now cast him in a more monstrous role than any of his previous actions. This marriage felt less like a strategic gain and more like a mutual confinement scenario. And in the room across the hall, Serafina was likely still conscious, anticipating the dawn, interpreting his benign actions as a new, more sophisticated form of psychological warfare. His entire empire was founded on his ability to analyze others, exploit their pathologies, and seize his objectives. Sleep provided Dominic no respite, merely 2 hours of cognitive cycling before a gray dawn emerged. By 6 o'clock, he was in the kitchen with coffee he did not want, allowing the oppressive silence to exert pressure. He theorized about Serafina's sleep state. Her door opened at 7:30. She was dressed in dark denim and a simple sweater, her hair restrained. The physiological signs of fatigue were etched into her features, but she had managed to construct a fragile facade of composure. "Good morning." Her voice was quiet and formal. "Morning." Dominic indicated the coffee. "Do you require any?" She shook her head, then appeared to reconsider. "Yes, in fact, please." He poured the coffee, observing the tremor in her grip as she integrated cream and sugar. Her focus remained fixed on a point beyond his shoulder, a clear pattern of gaze aversion. When he inquired if she had eaten, her response was a clipped, "Yes, I am fine," followed by a flinch from the cup's thermal energy. She claimed it was too hot, despite having consumed most of it. Between them, the kitchen island functioned as a non-verbal barricade. The city outside was activating, but inside, the quiet was a suffocating force. And then Dominic broke it. "We must communicate, authentically this time." There would be no repeat of the prior night's fractured interaction. No more recitation of the script her parents had instilled. Only the unmitigated, objective truth. Serafina's knuckles blanched against the mug. "Understood." He directed her to sit, and she chose a chair at the maximum possible distance. Every neurological impulse signaled a desire to flee. Dominic, conversely, remained standing, pacing like a caged predator. "I am going to pose questions, and you will provide direct responses. Do you understand?" "I can attempt to." And then he deployed the critical probe. "Did you consent to this marriage?" There it was. A faint, fractured sound escaped her. "No." She had consented to no part of this. Her father had manipulated her guilt with clinical precision, speaking of duty and ambiguous threats, framing the marriage as the sole variable capable of preserving their family. He constructed a reality where her refusal would designate her as the agent of their destruction. And her mother? She had provided a grim indoctrination on wifely functions and his probable appetites. She had made it explicitly clear that if Serafina failed to satisfy him, all of them would suffer the consequences. An arctic rage began to recrystallize within Dominic. "Your parents commodified you, then induced guilt for the transaction." "They were in extremis," she whispered. "They were cowards." She attempted to rationalize their actions, but he interrupted her. "They used you for cover, Serafina. You were deployed as a human shield. That is not love." She retorted, "And what is your expertise on love?" Then immediately recoiled from her own defiance. His tone remained level. "I have no expertise on that subject, but I recognize exploitation. And your father used you as collateral to mitigate his own failures." The subject, Serafina, exhibits an explosive physical reaction indicative of a severe stress response. "The circumstances are not understood. My family was disintegrating. My father's existence was threatened." She protests. A heroic narrative has been internalized. positioning her as the sole agent of resolution. What was my alternative? Refusal? Dominic, with the detached precision of a surgeon, responds without hesitation. Correct. The appropriate response was refusal. The appropriate response was to allow your father to resolve his own catastrophic failures. She scoffs. A facile judgment from your position. You hold absolute power. I held a responsibility. The subject is a compliant captive within the architecture of her own martyrdom. Two younger siblings require protection. A family reputation needs preservation. What manner of deviant would I be to simply abandon them, he counters. Perhaps one who acknowledges her own intrinsic value, yet she is conditioned by her upbringing. My life does not supersede theirs. The declaration remains between them, a perfect diagnosis of her self-destructive ideation. Dominic was observing a woman meticulously conditioned to believe that affection necessitates self-annihilation. When he inquires about her instructor, she replies, "It was never taught. It is the nature of reality." As Dominic reduces the proximity between them, she displays a distinct flinch response. He ceases movement, raising his hands in a non-threatening gesture. I will not make physical contact, but it is imperative you process this. It was then he exposed the unvarnished, pathological foundation of their arrangement. Your father was not merely acquiring protection, he orchestrated a transaction, your life in exchange for his financial gain. He enumerated the clinical facts, the shipping lanes valued in the millions, the strategic power, the new territory. Your father was not simply absolved of debt, Serafina. He profited from your commodification. She winces, her psyche resisting such a fundamental betrayal. He exchanged you for $3 million and a percentage of all subsequent profits. He states, his tone devoid of affect, that is not a man in distress. That is a proprietor finalizing a negotiation. Serafina collapses back into the chair as if her skeletal structure has failed. He presents his phone, displaying the contract. Observe for yourself, page 14, section 7, the payment structure. She regards the device as if it were a venomous creature poised to attack before accepting it. Her eyes process the text, and one can pinpoint the precise moment her worldview fractures. Her entire facial expression dissolves. Cease, she murmurs, pushing the phone toward him. Do not offer an apology. You were merely presenting the truth. Yet new tears form pathways on her cheeks. This was no longer an expression of fear. This was the pure, unmediated articulation of grief. It was the termination of the core belief that gave her sacrifice purpose. He sold me, she states, the word cementing the reality, as property, as if I were nothing. A hollow laugh emerges. My own father assigned a monetary value to my head. That would be the definition of nothing, would it not? And for the first time, Dominic offered no response. Aldo had converted his daughter into a line item on a ledger, and Dominic had been his counterparty to that exchange. I was not aware, he says, the words feeling like foreign objects. Upon signing, I was made to believe you were a co-equal participant in this agreement. And now? Now I understand you were coerced. I understand you are terrified. And I understand this is not a burden you should be forced to carry. The contract, however, remained a restraint. He allowed another piece of data to surface. A dissolution clause exists within the contract. Her gaze locks onto his. For one transient second, a trace of hope illuminates her features. Then, with equal speed, it is extinguished. My sisters? What becomes of them? The individuals threatening my father will not be concerned with a voided contract. If she departed, her family would be immediately re-exposed to the primary threat. With that, her resolution was formed. She must remain. You would remain in a detested marriage solely to shield them. They are 8 and 10 years of age. Her conviction was a psychological fortress. They are not deserving of any of this. So yes, I will remain. I will perform every action this document dictates. My only requirement is your assurance that you will maintain their safety. An internal shift in him is perceptible. He comprehends the brutal sophistication of her psychological prison. She is completely immobilized. Departure imperils her sisters. Remaining erodes her psyche. It was a perfect psychological checkmate. Then he spoke. What if a third option exists? What if you stay, but we alter the parameters? She appeared disoriented. Alter them in what way? Dominic methodically outlined the revised terms. Legally, they were married, but no statute dictated she must exist as a prisoner. We can render this manageable. He clarified his intent. He would never coerce her. There would be no performance of spousal obligations. She would reside in his home. They would maintain a public facade, and her family would be protected. But privately, she would be autonomous. The word autonomous sounded like a term from an unlearned language. That is difficult to accept, she said. I am aware, he conceded. She analyzed his expression, searching for the subtext, the deception she perceived as inevitable. What is your motive? What is the hidden cost? He detailed the business justifications and strategic logic, then paused. And, perhaps, it is an opportunity to sleep without my conscience in a state of agitation. She was not convinced. You do not present as a man who suffers from his decisions. I never have, he acknowledged. But observing your psychological fracture last night, I would not classify that as a victory. You experienced remorse. I felt monstrous. Perhaps that is what you are, she said, stating an objective observation. Or perhaps we are both merely components in the same apparatus. Perhaps, while the city maintained its rhythm outside, they began to reconstruct the terms of her confinement. I will require assurances. Seraphina's voice had changed, now stable and firm, the tremor gone. If I am to remain, I require certainty of my sister's safety, not a promise, a fact. Confirmed. They will have a security detail, unseen but total. And my father's debt, the men pursuing him? As of yesterday, his creditors are now my subordinates. To reach him, they must first confront me. Dominic's tone lowered, becoming almost confidential. Your sisters are inviolable. Your family is now an asset I protect, regardless of your father's merit. And the 3 million? His compensation? Yes, what of it? Can you retrieve those funds? Guarantee he loses every cent? A single eyebrow rose, a silent, pointed query. And for what purpose would you request that? Because he will not profit from my commodification. He will not depart with the belief that this was a strategic success. Her tone became glacial. He must learn the actual cost of his choices. In that moment, Dominic perceived it, the core of resilience she had been conditioned to suppress, a thing that was bent but not broken. I can arrange that, but it will result in your family's financial ruin. Excellent. Let him be ruined. Let him learn true desperation instead of liquidating me like an asset. For the first time, her gaze met his, direct and unyielding. I will be the sacrifice for my sisters, but my father will not use it to finance his life. Consider it handled. Truly, with such ease? With such ease. Dominic took out his phone, his thumb issuing a directive to his legal team. By nightfall, that payment will convert to a debilitating debt with punitive interest. He will regret the day he ever accepted that money. A trace of dark, cold gratification appeared on Serafina's face. Thank you. Do not thank me. I am still the man who holds your contract. But you're also the man making this enclosure tolerable. She held her coffee cup like a grounding object. And that is not insignificant. The ensuing silence was different. Not a conflict zone, but a fragile, implicit armistice. I have inquiries, Serafina stated, her voice subdued. Concerning you, concerning this environment I have entered. Then inquire. The rumors about you, do any possess veracity? That is contingent upon what you have been told. That you have taken lives, that you direct a criminal enterprise, that you are a man of significant danger. Dominic faced a choice, the palliative falsehood or the brutal honesty he had offered her. Yes, all of it is factual. She absorbed the confession with no change in her expression. How many? The number of men I have killed. Correct. Are you certain you desire that information? I am cohabitating with you. I am bound to you. I believe I am entitled to know the man who has entrapped me. A logical point? I ceased counting after the initial few. A number were acts of self-preservation. Some were for commercial reasons, some— His voice faded. Some were because I was enraged or to broadcast a message. At times it was merely the most efficient solution. Do you experience regret? The question seemed to take him entirely by surprise. For some. For the undeserving. For those present at the incorrect time and place, but not for the entirety of them. No, not for all of them. Certain individuals must simply be removed from the equation. That is a fact. Serafina was silent for a considerable time. My father described you as ruthless. He claimed you built this upon a foundation of violence and fear. He stated it as a commendation. It is not strength. It is a survival mechanism that metastasized into a pathology. What is your meaning? Dominic rose and moved to the window, creating a significant distance between them. I was raised in an environment where weakness was an invitation to be assaulted, where emotion was a liability you gave your adversaries. The only path to survival was to be harder, more brutal, and more willing to commit terrible acts than anyone else. So that is what I became, and it was effective. I survived. I built this. I fashioned myself into the monster everyone feared, rather than the boy being victimized. But at some point on that trajectory, survival transformed into conquest. Fear transformed into power. And I ceased to ask if an action was moral, and simply executed it because my power was absolute. My ascendancy was predicated on an absence of meaningful opposition. He pivoted from the window, his focus now entirely on her. Your father's assessment was accurate. I am without mercy. I am a significant threat. And my history of actions would induce a flight response were you not already contained. My response is not flight. A rational subject would withdraw. But I am not. She rose, navigating toward the window but maintaining a calculated perimeter. May I present my analysis? Proceed. My hypothesis is that this display is designed to intimidate, to impress upon me the magnitude of your pathology so that my behavior modifies. I should what? Regress? Submit? acknowledge my subordinate position. She negated the idea with a shake of her head. This, however, is the clinical reality. I have reached my threshold for fear. The stimulus can no longer produce a stronger response. Therefore, you may cease the performance and simply manifest your true self. Dominic remained inert, observing her. The subject who, the previous night, exhibited tremors that precluded ambulation, was now confronting his power with a dispassionate composure. I clearly made an error in my initial evaluation of your resilience. My father perceived me as a decorative object, submissive, a valuable asset for transaction. But my cognitive function is unimpaired. I have spent a lifetime in observation from the periphery, gathering data. She crossed her arms, a posture of self-containment. So, do not engage with me as a naive specimen. I recognize your nature. I perceive this environment for what it is. My objective is merely to learn the protocols for survival within this system. A logical objective. Dominic returned to his chair. Then we shall proceed with factual data. No more theatrics. I constructed my reality with violence, as it was the only methodology I was ever taught. I possess a high aptitude for it, beyond any normative standard, and I experience minimal remorse, as the system I operate within does not reinforce empathy. And yet you are demonstrating a compassionate variance with me. Am I? Or is it merely a hesitation to classify you among the extensive catalog of things I have previously dismantled? Is the distinction relevant? The answer is unknown. And that was the unvarnished clinical truth. Dominic could not process why Serafina's terror was the singular stimulus to have ever breached his psychological defenses. He could not quantify why her fear registered differently than that of his adversaries. He had no logical framework for why compelling her submission felt like a catastrophic wound to his own psyche. They observed one another across the table, two subjects bound by a non-consensual pact, each attempting to process a path forward. What is the next phase of our protocol? Serafina finally terminated the silence. For now, we identify a method of coexistence that does not result in mutual destruction. That constitutes the master strategy? It is the inception of one. The remainder will be extrapolated from emergent data. The barest trace of a smile formed on her lips. You do not present as an individual who improvises strategy. Under normal parameters, I do not have to. Most variables can be controlled. This, he indicated the space between them, this is an uncharted territory for both of us. Affirmative. The silence that ensued was qualitatively different. It lacked comfort or peace, but it was no longer characterized by conflict. It was, instead, two individuals beginning to perceive the person behind the assigned role. I am required to depart, Dominic stated, rising. Priorities that cannot be deferred. Victor will remain. Should you require anything, he will facilitate it. Victor, your chief of security? The same. His phenotype is brutish, but he is... Dominic searched for the correct term. He is a decent man. You will be safe with him. Safe? She articulated the word as if analyzing a foreign object for the first time. Understood. There are provisions in the kitchen. You have access. The television is functional. Literature is in the study. The gymnasium is on the second floor. This is now your primary residence as well. My residence. Her gaze scanned the vast penthouse as if she were committing its layout to memory. I lack the programming for how to inhabit a home. Clarify your statement. For my entire life, I have existed in my father's structure under my mother's protocols. performing the function I was given. I have never possessed a space of my own, not a single interval that wasn't choreographed or monitored. Her eyes locked with his. I do not know how to simply exist without directive. The admission impacted him with a force for which he was unprepared. Then that will be your new function, to learn. You have temporal resources now, a surplus of them. And upon my return, we will take a meal, we will communicate, we will continue this process of extrapolation. He moved to the door, then paused. Serafina, my statement last night was factual. I will not inflict physical harm upon you, ever. That is not the nature of this situation. Then what is its nature? To be candid, I am still attempting to formulate that diagnosis myself. He was gone before she could offer a rebuttal, the elevator doors closing, isolating her with her own disoriented affect. As he descended, Dominic registered the immense cognitive load of his own statements. He had made guarantees he was uncertain he could uphold. He had offered a clemency he was unsure he possessed. He had attempted to present as a version of a man that had never existed. Victor was in the lobby, leaning against a wall, arms crossed. What was the outcome of the upstairs interaction? She is aware of the financial transaction and her father's role in it. What was her reaction? More stable than I had any basis to predict, and infinitely more damaged than she should ever have been. Dominic moved toward the exit. She is isolated up there. Maintain observation. Remain covert but ensure her security. You believe she's a flight risk? I believe she could cease to exist in other ways. Just be non-threatening. Victor's nod was the only confirmation necessary. What is our destination? We are proceeding to a meeting with Aldo. Finally. A cold smile manifested on Victor's lips. Do I require the instruments? Not for this engagement. This is a verbal exchange, but he will comprehend that it is the only one he will receive. They moved through the city's transitioning zones of commerce and capital. Aldo's office was elevated in a midtown tower, an environment that reeked of established wealth, attempting to appear contemporary. Dominic had been in this office on one prior occasion during the initial negotiation. At that time, Aldo was a composite of smooth gestures and positive projections. This meeting would not follow that model. The elevator ascended to the 14th floor. Aldo's secretary, a visibly anxious woman in her 50s, made a futile attempt to intercept them, but a single hard stare from Victor caused her to disengage. They entered to find Aldo laughing into his phone. The sound terminated in his throat when he registered Dominic's expression. I must terminate this call. The connection was severed. Dominic, this is unexpected. I believed our transaction was concluded. It was. Now we are initiating a discussion of the revised terms. Dominic occupied a chair without invitation. Victor blocked the doorway. A human barricade. I'm afraid I do not understand. The $3 million you were compensated for your daughter. It is now our asset. The blood evacuated Aldo's face, then returned in a blotchy, enraged surge. That is not a negotiable point. The contract specified those funds. You cannot just... I can do exactly as I choose. Your sole decision in this matter is whether the transfer is seamless or if it becomes problematic. The contract secured you the capital. It did not guarantee you would retain it. Dominic leaned back, projecting utter indifference. Consider it a debt we are now calling in, a debt with a punishing rate of interest. This is simple extortion. No, it is a business adjustment. Extortion would involve me threatening your biological continuation for the currency. I am merely informing you of a contractual amendment. Aldo stood, attempting to project an authority he no longer possessed. I will contest this. I will initiate legal proceedings. The contract is binding. You could attempt that. But you should first analyze the risk. Do you truly wish to engage in a conflict with me over the price you received for your own progeny? Dominic's voice became a scalpel of ice. Because I can guarantee you, Aldo, you will not prevail in that conflict. You will not even survive its initial phase. The threat altered the atmospheric pressure in the room, making it heavy and difficult to breathe. Aldo collapsed into his chair, a man suddenly rendered hollow. Why are you instituting this? The arrangement was finalized. Serafina consented. It was complete. Serafina was subjected to coercion. She did not consent. There is a profound distinction. She was provided a choice. She was provided the illusion of a choice. The two are not synonymous. Dominic leaned forward. You utilized your own offspring as a strategic asset and rationalized it as an act for the family. You leveraged her sister's future to terrorize her into compliance. You allowed her to believe she was the savior when you were only preserving yourself. And you capitalized on her sacrifice. I did what was required. No, you did what was expedient, the maneuver that allowed you to evade the consequences of your own errors. Dominic stood. The money is forfeit. My people will establish contact with yours to arrange a repayment schedule. You will be servicing this debt for the next 10 years, with interest designed to make you revile the memory of every dollar. I don't possess that level of liquidity. You have the shipping lanes now. Then I suggest you innovate a solution, be creative. Is that not the directive you gave Serafina when you traded her away? That desperate scenarios require great sacrifices? Dominic began moving to the door. Now you will experience what stimulus feels like. Wait. Aldo's voice was a dry, rasping sound. My other daughters, my younger ones, the protection you guaranteed them remains active, does it not? Unlike you, I do not hold children accountable for the failures of their father. Dominic paused in the doorway. But let us be unequivocally clear that protection extends to them and only them. If you deviate from the new protocol, create complications, or even process a thought of Serafina without my express authorization, our next interaction will be substantially different. She is my daughter. She was your daughter. Now she is my wife. And I, unlike you, will treat her as something more than an entry in a financial ledger. He left Aldo sitting there, immobilized, his face a mask of rage, terror, and perhaps the initial onset of shame. Victor was silent until the elevator doors had sealed. Do you feel an improvement in your state? Not in the slightest. Dominic jabbed the button for the ground floor. Yet the action was necessary. What is the prognosis for her, for Serafina? I have no assessment. Have you developed a countertransference? I am unacquainted with the subject, yet you exhibit concern for her welfare, or you wish to prevent her harm, which is functionally identical in your psyche. Dominic was silent. Victor's diagnosis was accurate. An element of Serafina had infiltrated his defenses, compelling him to re-examine deeply ingrained schemas. It forced a desire for a new persona. The central conflict was whether such a man could fundamentally restructure his personality. Could an individual whose existence was predicated on violence ever be a trusted figure for a traumatized young woman? He possessed no answers, only compounding questions that intensified with every observation of the pain in Serafina's eyes. Each flinch she made in his proximity was evidence of her trauma. Every forced attempt at composure was a thin psychological shield he easily penetrated. When Dominic came back to the penthouse, Serafina was located in the kitchen. On this occasion, she had prepared a meal, pasta with a commercial sauce, a salad assembled with more resolve than expertise. Her back was toward him, her rigid posture outlining the confines of her new, opulent confinement. The aroma is remarkable. She recoiled, pivoting with a wooden spoon brandished as a weapon. Upon identifying him, some of her hypervigilance subsided, but the wariness in her expression remained a constant feature. I prepared sustenance. I was uncertain of your return. I simply... Her gesture indicated the stove. The quantity is sufficient for 2 if you require nourishment. That was not a mandated task. I required a manual distraction. Victor oriented me to the kitchen's layout. She returned to the stove, agitating a pot that required no attention. He possesses an atypical gentleness for a man whose physique suggests he could tear a directory in 2. He is capable of it. Dominic loosened his tie, the day's weight settling in his chest. What was the subject of your discourse? Primarily literature. He noted my interest in your collection and recommended some authors. I would never have profiled him as a reader. Few individuals do. They perceive only the scarring and his stature and assume that is the entirety of his narrative. Serafina set down the spoon, dispensing the pasta with meticulous, restrained movements. Is that their perception of you as well? Do they observe only the predator archetype and conclude that is all you are? The query caught him unprepared. I do not allocate cognitive resources to the perceptions of others. But you do, on occasion. She extended a plate to him, her gaze averted. If you were truly indifferent, you would not have disclosed the truth about the funds, about my father. You would have permitted me to persist in the delusion I had already internalized. Perhaps I simply required you to perceive your father for what he is. Or perhaps you required me to perceive the man you aspire to be. She finally met his gaze. So, which is it? Dominic accepted the plate and moved to the table. I have not yet reached a conclusion. They consumed their meal in a dense silence. The pasta was basic, but the gesture itself held more significance than the food. Beyond the glass, the sunset stained the Hudson with bands of orange and violet. I communicated with my mother earlier. Serafina's voice was barely audible. I utilized the phone in your office. I trust that was acceptable. That device is also your property. You have no need to request access. A conditioned response. She prodded the food on her plate. I called to report that I was adapting satisfactorily, that my circumstances were stable. What was her response? She inquired if I was upholding my end of the transaction, if I was maintaining your contentment. If I had, Serafina's voice fractured. If I had performed the function she conditioned me for, the one a wife performs on her nuptial night. Dominic placed his fork down. And what was your reply to her? I constructed a narrative. I confirmed that events transpired as she had orchestrated, that I was performing the role of a compliant spouse. She looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears of pure indignation. The reality was something I could not provide her. I could not concede that my own husband has treated me with more deference than my mother ever has. That the very monster I was conditioned to fear is the sole individual who is bothered to ask what I desire. Serafina. She trafficked me too. Do you not see it? She framed it as a familial imperative, my destiny. But she collaborated with my father and persuaded me it was a noble sacrifice. All that time she was grooming me to be, the word lodged in her throat, to be exploited. That was the objective of every lesson. how to endure it, how to be silent and unseen and submissive, how to function as chattel. My apologies. Do not be. You are not the originator of this contract. You are merely the individual who now possesses the title. She rose abruptly from her chair and began clearing plates while Dominic was still eating. My mother suggested a visit to present my new spouse to the family. She wants to exhibit me, proof that her major transaction was profitable. You are under no obligation to attend. Oh, but I am. My sisters remain in that household. I must see them to verify their safety. She activated the faucet, her actions sharp with fury. Besides, do you not wish to examine your acquisition? To demonstrate to the family that you now own their daughter? Is that not the protocol for this particular game? This is not a game, is it not? You consented to this arrangement for shipping lanes and expanded territory. Civility does not alter the fundamental nature of the transaction. She scrubbed a dish that was already immaculate. I remain the asset you procured, the price my father was willing to pay. Dominic stood and approached her, maintaining a calculated distance between them. You are absolutely incandescent with rage. Of course I am. I am luminous with it. I am... She slammed the plate onto the counter with enough force to crack it. I am so overwhelmed with rage I can scarcely respire. At my father for selling me, my mother for facilitating it, and myself for being too paralyzed by fear to refuse. At him for this entire catastrophe, even as he feigns the role of a rescuer. At everything. She was descending into a negative spiral. He interrupted it with a single directive. Then be feral. Destroy something if you must. Her gaze moved from the fractured plate to his face, questioning his intent. Absolutely. This is your residence. If shattering objects provides you with catharsis, then shatter them. We can procure more dishes. She stared at him as if he were deranged. And perhaps he was, but it was a healthier form of psychosis than allowing that toxicity to consume her from within. Serafina observed him, a palpable shift occurring within her. In one seamless motion, she seized the plate and hurled it at the wall. It detonated, the acute sound of its destruction echoing through the space. Her respiration was heavy as she stared at the destruction in disbelief. A sound escaped her, a fractured, hysterical laugh trapped within a sob. Oh my God, she had actually thrown a plate, he inquired. An improvement? She replied. In fact, yes. That felt. And she laughed once more, a lone tear tracing a path down her cheek. That was extraordinary. He offered her another plate. She said no, but perhaps. The young woman collapsed to the floor, encircled by the ceramic fragments of her own defiance. She had never intentionally broken anything, never permitted herself that form of anger, always instructed to suppress it. Be pleasant, avoid creating a disturbance. As Dominic retrieved a broom and began to sweep, he made a silent resolution. You may unleash a tempest in here. You can scream. You can break every single dish if it brings you solace. And he was sincere. He was entirely sincere. She observed him sweeping the remnants of her rage, a moment of profound quiet amid the chaos. She then inquired, why are you demonstrating such decency toward me? He was direct. I am not a virtuous man. Inquire with nearly anyone, they will confirm it. But you are with me. For what reason? After clearing the fragments, Dominic leaned against the counter. In truth, I lack a coherent explanation. Perhaps because witnessing your distress is a cost I am less inclined to bear than any illicit bargain I have ever made. Or perhaps I am weary of the villain archetype. Or maybe I perceive you were dealt a horrific fate, and the minimum I can do is not compound it. She saw his evasion. Those are all calculated responses. What do you truly want from me? For him to profess some profound emotion? Their union was 2 days old. But she insisted, you feel something. Otherwise, none of this would be significant. He recognized her accuracy. The truth of it resonated deep within him. For 20 years, this man had systematically excised emotion from his life. Individuals were instruments. The world was a strategic board. And now this woman, a transactional asset on paper, was activating sentiments he had long since repressed. He redirected the conversation abruptly. We should establish some parameters. Conditions you can tolerate, conditions you cannot, your absolute boundaries. Serafina drew her knees toward her chest. Such as physical contact, I am aware you do not want my touch. I will honor that. But for public perception, if we must appear as a couple, may I place a hand on your back or on your arm? She had to consider it carefully. If you provide a verbal cue first, if I understand it is for appearances, I can tolerate it. But nothing spontaneous, and that is the limit. No embraces, no kisses. He concurred. Understood. And our cohabitation protocol? Do you require a separate chamber? Is that an option available to me? The option is entirely yours. Yes. She needed a private domain, a room with a lock where she could simply exist. He replied, It is done. There are 3 unoccupied bedrooms. Select one. We will relocate your possessions. She appeared utterly astonished. It is that simple? It is that simple. Is there anything else? I must engage in work or volunteer. I cannot remain idle here all day, awaiting your return. Like some... Her voice faltered. Like some acquisition. What is it you want to do? The subject displayed no awareness of personal ambition, a state conditioned by her upbringing. Her parents' objective was for her to secure a wealthy husband and manage a household. This was the totality of her projected future. A sharp, mirthless vocalization escaped her. It would seem the marital component of their plan was achieved, at least regarding the financial aspect. He inquired about her academic pursuits prior to the collapse of her world. Education? She confessed a clandestine aspiration to become a teacher of young children. Her entire countenance softened at the admission. I have a deep affinity for children. Their candor, their capacity for wonder, how they perceive the world before existence makes them jaded. His response was instantaneous, then become one. But I lacked the credentials. I was forced to withdraw when my father's enterprise collapsed. The tuition became an impossibility. Financial limitations are no longer a factor. Complete your coursework, obtain your license, or engage in volunteer work while you deliberate. Dominic produced his phone. My aide can arrange consultations with several institutions. You may assess which one is preferable, she queried. You are not being facetious. Why would I jest about such a thing? You desire employment, so go work. Your existence did not cease upon marrying me. Serafina observed him, as if he had manifested a second head. This is entirely illogical. My own father barters me to a crime lord who subsequently presents as a proponent of female empowerment. He corrected her. I am a proponent of what is expedient. Your misery and boredom benefit no one. You possessing a life is a more favorable presentation for us both. She files him within the typology of dangerous men she has encountered, and concludes he is the most anomalous. When he questions her sample size, she admits it comprises only 2 subjects, him and her father. Her father's brand of intimidation, she explains, involved not fractured bones, but the silent, methodical dismantling of an individual's psyche. Dominic observes that regardless of the method, you are left with cicatrices. Concurring, she rises, composes herself, and requests to pose a personal question. He permits the inquiry without guaranteeing a response. She asks of his family if there is anyone for whom he feels affection. He considers his Aunt Teresa, the sole relative at their nuptials. A single aunt, he states, with whom he corresponds perhaps twice a year. That is the extent of it. His parents are deceased, his father at 19, his mother some years after. She starts to express condolences, but he preempts her. He clarifies his father was a brute, animated by alcohol and rage, and his mother was a passive enabler through her silence. Their deaths, he states, represented no personal loss. This disclosure causes Serafina to reduce the physical distance between them for the first time. She asks if this shared history of powerlessness explains his insight, his effort to be different. Perhaps, he concedes, he comprehends the helplessness, having another dictate your existence, feeling insecure in the one environment meant for safety. His eyes lock with hers. He recalls the vow he made upon leaving that home, to never be weak again, to never cede that control to another. She then notes the profound irony that he now wields that very power over her. He affirms the validity of her point, stating that is the precise reason he struggles so intensely not to employ it, a perpetual conflict. Her gaze was a direct challenge, compelling him to confront the dominion he wielded. He understood a falsehood would be a profound disrespect. The marital contract he conceded was a legal framework for captivity her father had constructed, vesting him with nearly total control. But her inquiry was not about legality, but intent. If she were to disappoint him, would he exercise that ultimate authority? The word no was an apparition on his tongue, a reassurance he could not truthfully provide. He admitted to his own capacity for darkness, to barbaric acts prompted by far lesser stimuli. He could not promise a behavioral transformation based on words. She accepted this disclosure with a slow inclination of her head, her gratitude a peculiar, grave sentiment reserved for his brutal candor. He had provided her with the truth, he stated, when a fabrication would have been the preferred kindness for most men. But he was not most men. A slight smile touched her lips as she acknowledged the distinction. In the subsequent days, a new and strange quietude formed between them. Dominic would depart before dawn into a professional world she knew not to scrutinize. She would spend her mornings exploring the confines of their gilded prison. Her afternoons were consumed by calls with schools, an endeavor aided by a surprisingly useful recommendation from Victor's wife. Evenings reunited them for dinner, where the silence gradually yielded to tentative dialogues that gained stability with each passing night. Serafina selected the chamber at the corridor's end, the one with windows that faced the sunrise. Her belongings were delivered, relocated by Dominic's implicit directive. She started to leave minor imprints of her identity in the environment, a book on a side table, a coat on a chair, small assertions of existence that mitigated the vast, cold atmosphere of the rooms. On the fourth day, Marcus's arrival was like a weather front. Dominic was in his office when Victor's voice came over the intercom. Chen was present, citing an emergency. Marcus entered, his features marked by tension. The Colombo problem required discussion. Dominic dismissed it, but Marcus persisted. The Colombos were agitated about the shipping lanes, asserting an infringement on what was formerly Vale's territory. It was no longer Vale's, Dominic said without inflection. It was his. This, Marcus clarified, was the crux of the problem. They had a profitable partnership with Aldo. With that income source severed, their behavior was becoming erratic. A familiar fury began to build in Dominic's chest. He was indifferent to their agitation and swore he would not enter negotiations. Marcus cautioned that negotiation might become unavoidable unless he preferred open warfare. Dominic scoffed. He was acquainted with war. Not this variant, Marcus said, his voice lowering. Not with a wife whose security was now a factor. The words found their mark. Dominic moved toward the window. Marcus pressed on. They were aware of Serafina. The entire city was aware, and some now perceived her as a point of vulnerability. While Dominic's retaliation for any injury would be storied, Marcus remarked, "Vengeance offers no solace to a wraith." Marcus moved closer, his intent not to incite fear, but to reactivate the strategist. The Dominic he had known would have foreseen this, would have formulated a contingency. But that version was not encumbered by a heart. The insinuation that he had overlooked collateral risk drew a sharp reply. Marcus studied him, perplexed by the shift since the wedding, by this new, hazardous distraction. Dominic maintained the matter was under control. Marcus expressed his skepticism, positing that emotion was now supplanting strategy. A terminal miscalculation in their profession. Just then, his phone vibrated. An unrecognized number. He accessed the message and saw a single image that caused a visceral, chilling response. A photograph of Serafina captured from a distance only hours prior. The image was taken from a vehicle on the opposite side of the street, a communication delivered without any text. "We have an issue," he stated, angling the screen toward Marcus. The message was seconds old. He moved like a phantom into the living room, where Serafina was engrossed in a book. She glanced up at his turbulent expression, and her own calm fractured. "What is wrong?" she inquired. He informed her they had to address her security arrangements. When she demanded to know why, he disclosed that she was under surveillance, presenting the photograph that had been received 5 minutes earlier. The color fled from her face as she processed the who and the why. "Because," he said, his voice an icy layer over a molten core of rage, "they view you as the fulcrum to shatter me." This new reality, he declared, necessitated a total restructuring of her life. "So now I am a captive?" she retorted. He corrected the term to a requirement for continuous protection, a detail Victor was currently assembling. Serafina stood, her book dropping to the floor with a muted impact, her tone resolute. No. She had only just begun to experience a trace of autonomy and would not relinquish it. He stated the matter was not subject to negotiation. She argued that all matters were, citing his promise to allow her choices. That promise, he countered, was given before she became a strategic asset on a game board. She contended it might not be a threat, but his voice became like tempered steel. "It is a threat!" He recognized the gambit. The initial play is to demonstrate access. The subsequent play, he did not articulate, would not be a picture. From the threshold, Marcus intervened, corroborating his analysis. "He is correct, Serafina. This is exceptionally grave." She accused him of aligning with Dominic. Marcus clarified he was aligned with her survival. He then addressed Dominic, conceding that she also had a valid point. To seclude her was to replicate the behavior of her father. The parallel struck Dominic with the force of a physical impact. He turned back to Serafina and requested her proposal. "I require safety," she stated, "but I must exist as a person, not an artifact secured in a vault." When he requested a compromise, she presented one. Security details when she was outside, but freedom from observation within the house, a minimal claim to a normal existence. I will not exist as a prisoner within this home, she vowed. Agreed, he consented, but Victor's protocols are to be obeyed without deviation. You are to report your movements. You are to avoid any reckless behavior. She translated with a cool detachment. Because my exposure is your liability. He countered with an impulsive, unfeigned admission. Because I have no wish for you to come to harm. The unadorned confession left her momentarily stunned. Is that so difficult to accept? He inquired. She could only stare, conceding that what truly unnerved her was the possibility he was being genuine. His monstrosity was a simple construct, easy to despise. But these flashes of the man underneath, she murmured, folding her arms across her torso, they complicated everything. Registering the dynamic shift, Marcus discreetly exited to inspect the perimeter. A profound stasis settled between the subjects. Serafina's vocalization, when initiated, was barely audible. She articulated an inability to function within their current parameters, to reconcile her role as his spouse with her fear of his nature, or to accept a form of protection that designated her his primary vulnerability. She questioned the viability of trust, given a lifetime of conditioning to the contrary. He offered no palliative falsehoods. Trust in me is contraindicated, he stated. Not absolutely. My character is not fundamentally pro-social. I am attempting behavioral modification for you, but better, maybe outside my baseline. This assessment offered minimal comfort. It is the objective data, he noted. Resigned, she slumped in her chair. Yes, it is. The shrill alert from Dominic's device fractured the tenuous equilibrium. Victor, the voice on the line transmitted. We have the asset from the surveillance image. A traffic sensor captured the registration. It is assigned to a Colombo subordinate. Dominic's directive was concise. Acquire him. When queried on whether the acquisition protocol should be covert or demonstrative, Dominic's focus shifted to Serafina, observed as fragile, fearful, yet defiant. Overt, he commanded. I require it to be understood what consequences follow contact with my assets. He terminated the communication, his gaze locking with hers. She correctly interpreted the command's intent. You intend to inflict harm, she stated, possibly terminate them, based on an image. He clarified the photograph's function. It was a probe of his territorial boundaries, which required a lethal defense posture. She rose, a silhouette against the darkened window. This is your operational environment, she stated softly. Coercion and violence. He affirmed this with a quiet, correct, and I am now a component of it. Again, correct. She then requested a specific assurance. He must confirm the subsequent action was based on necessity, not emotional dysregulation or a display of power, but on strategic logic. Dominic closed the proximity between them. He articulated the grim calculus. The image signaled she was a target within their reach. Failure to respond with overwhelming force would be perceived by all rivals as an invitation to exploit her as a viable target. That, he concluded, was the rationale. He asked if the necessity was sufficient for her. After significant pause, she gave a slow, pained affirmation. The pathological logic of their shared existence settled with a stark lucidity. This, she felt compelled to clarify, was the reality of their bond. She referenced their vows, the contract that had embedded her in this life. His own memory was predatory, recalling not her words, but her state of terror. To her, each syllable was a brick in the architecture of her confinement, a realized anxiety. She now confronted him with the parameters of her entrapment, a containment system built by her designated protectors. This was not a complaint, but a clinical statement of fact. Her life, as his spouse, was now a strategic liability, and her guardians were functionally her captors. A stark symmetry defined her paradox. Serafina's psychological crisis was not an indictment of Dominic, but an existential schism where security had become synonymous with confinement. His phone's sharp signal was a summons from the violent enterprise that sustained them. An individual, Dani Costa, was secured and non-compliant. Her observation of his egress was not an inquiry, but a flat declaration. He was leaving not merely to ask questions, but to deconstruct a subject for information, using pain as the primary instrument. Turning to the window, she observed her own reflection, a captive in a fortress, a circumstance she assessed as being as unjust as his own nature. That injustice, he might have argued, was the operational point. As she proceeded to her room, she made one final appeal, not for a change in his nature, but that he derive no gratification from its expression. She implored him to retain a vestige of humanity, to detest the suffering he was required to inflict. The door's closure functioned as a final judgment, leaving Dominic in the psychic reverberation of a conflict he hadn't realized was occurring. The Red Hook warehouse presented as a monument to decay, its silence engineered to amplify a scream. There, Dani Costa was displayed as a problem, his physical state a mere preliminary. His classification was simple: an operative for a rival, Marco Colombo. Dani Costa was a disposable asset, a street-level soldier of no intrinsic value. The critical data point was not his identity, but the source of his orders. His cover story involving simple reconnaissance for Marco was dismissed instantly. As Dominic approached, Dani's defiance was revealed as a fragile psychological construct. The subject's frantic request for legal counsel was met with derision, a sharp reminder that civil statutes were inapplicable in this jurisdiction. Here, rights were a null concept. The only operative forces were Dominic's will and the physiological limits of Dani's body. The choice presented was not liberty, but a selection between two architects of his termination. His invocation of legal rights was met with a swift conditioning strike that activated Dominic's predatory protocols. This was his domain, governed by the language of force. He restated the primary query. Who was the operation's architect? Under duress, Dani's fabricated narrative disintegrated, exposing the factual basis. His task was to maintain surveillance on the female subject, Serafina, to map her patterns and identify vulnerabilities for Marco Colombo. The objective was clear. Marco, reacting to strategic losses, was preparing a countermove. Dani's subsequent silence was a confession of the deeper, unspoken dimension of the plan. The strategy was to utilize Serafina as a psychological weapon against Dominic. This unstated truth resulted in another application of force, the sickening acoustic report of bone impact focusing Dominic on his grim task. This violent procedure induced a disturbing cognitive clarity. When pressed for a timeline, Dani could only articulate that it was imminent, that Marco was mobilizing personnel. Victor, Dominic's subordinate, confirmed the intelligence was credible. With the information extracted, Dominic's order was clinical and absolute. Dispose of him. Dani's desperate reference to a bargain was met with a cold clarification. The promise only pertained to his silence. Cooperation carried no guarantee of survival. Dominic departed before a final appeal could be articulated, entering a night that felt like a sensory blow. The tremor in his hands was not from fear, but from the neurochemical surge of power and violence. a combination that left him feeling both omnipotent and vacant. A text from Serafina disrupted the quiet. Her question, "Did you obtain the required information?" was a jarring intrusion of the mundane. His single-word reply was met with another, more penetrating query, "Are you functional?" The question's sheer normalcy was incongruous. His brief assurance to be home within an hour was met with an offer of a meal, a simple exchange that highlighted the fractured reality they were constructing. Upon his return, her eyes registered the physical evidence of his work, the abraded knuckles, the vacant affect. Her instruction was simple and devoid of judgment. Perform ablutions. As he scrubbed the biological residue from his skin, a futile gesture to cleanse the act itself, she prepared their food. They consumed it in a dense silence, in a shared environment where the violence underwriting their lifestyle was a mutually avoided topic. She never inquired about the blood, the warehouse, or the subject's outcome. Instead, she provided sustenance, a normalizing ritual on a day that was profoundly atypical. Then, with practiced detachment, she announced her own development. She had contacted a volunteer organization about teaching literacy to children in Brooklyn. She confirmed a start date for the following week, noting that Victor was already coordinating security protocols. The program supervisor, she remarked, was remarkably ordinary, blissfully unaware of her new volunteer's true affiliation. This anonymity was not an obstacle, but a source of profound relief, a fleeting opportunity to exist solely as Serafina, dissociated from her history or title. She then offered the same opportunity to him, to be only himself within their home. Her gaze, however, contained a tragic awareness as she posed the defining diagnostic question of their life together. Was that even possible, given the violent reality of his core identity? She conceded her daily struggle to exist without despising him, and by extension herself. The visual of him returning with biological evidence on his skin made the performance of normalcy an agonizing exercise. He responded not with a deception, but with the unvarnished truth of his existence. He had no inclination to simulate a persona he was not. Her frustration peaked. She confessed to not knowing her own desires, only that she was disoriented within the brutal framework he commanded. In response, Dominic moved his plate and delivered a chillingly direct report. The subject from the warehouse, the one conspiring with Columbo to harm her, had been permanently neutralized. He added, with no trace of remorse, that he did not regret the action. Serafina processed this information with a stillness indicative of a mind undergoing forced recalibration. Her response was not a moral critique, but a detached analysis. A typical individual would experience regret, but he was atypical. Therefore, a typical emotional response was not to be expected. While clearing the table, she drew a fine, critical distinction. She did not condone his actions. She could comprehend his brutal calculus without ever approving it. Understanding, she clarified, was not acceptance. She could perceive the mechanics of his violence, but she would never be reconciled to it. What, therefore, did he require from her? His silence indicated his own uncertainty, beyond a fundamental need for a cessation of her fear response toward him. He was seeking a de-escalation to make their shared confinement more tolerable. He finally requested time to codify the terms of their atypical union. She countered with the stark fact they were two individuals bound by a contract, but she then echoed his unspoken query. What further potential existed? For a moment she met his gaze, envisioning a future that was perhaps merely less painful. She proposed a new protocol, to cease defining their relationship and to simply coexist, one day at a time. Before retreating to her room, she offered a final, unexpected validation, an acknowledgement of his efforts, even as she lacked the vocabulary to reciprocate. The subsequent closing of her door signified not withdrawal, but the conclusion of an exhausting day. Dominic remained suspended between the city's ambient light and the shadow of his own conduct. He envisioned an instance of violence, followed by the image of a woman seeking humanity in a system he engineered to eradicate it. His entire enterprise was built upon the twin pillars of instilled fear and the methodical elimination of weakness. Yet the most significant threat to his equilibrium was now a 22-year-old woman whose expression held a duality of hope and terror, a silent imperative for him to evolve. The concept was operationally absurd. Could a subject conditioned for violence acquire the language of compassion? Could an individual who constructed psychological fortresses for 2 decades dismantle them for a near stranger? He possessed no data, only compromised hands, a psychic void that aggression no longer filled, and a mounting dread that Seraphina Vale was altering him in ways more fundamentally threatening than any adversary he had faced. For 2 weeks, their dynamic was a fragile procedure of mutual non-engagement. Seraphina located a delicate sense of purpose volunteering in Brooklyn, recounting narratives of children whose resolve surpassed their literacy. During their meals, Dominic would observe, experiencing a primal instinct to shield the optimism in her voice, a relic of her identity before his world assimilated her. Victor's security personnel were specters, their presence a constant subliminal pressure. Seraphina adapted, employing a city dweller's technique for filtering out disruptive stimuli. She was engineering a pocket of quasi-normalcy within her confinement, but tranquility in their reality is always a fleeting interlude. The disruption occurred on a Tuesday when Marco penetrated their quiet without authorization. A disturbance erupted. Dominic rose instantly. Seraphina? It was not the primary subject, it was her younger sibling. An individual had initiated a hostile action near her school. The atmosphere in the room became frigid. An attempt? Our assets intervened, but the operational window was narrow. Critically narrow. Marcus's expression was an unreadable mask. This signifies a severe escalation. Dominic was already activating his comms, his movements a fluid sequence of violent intent. Place Seraphina on immediate lockdown and deliver Marco Colombo to my location. Boss, acquiring Marco initiates open conflict. Let it be so. The children are never to be targeted, ever. The connection terminated. Marcus observed him, his posture radiating apprehension. You must analyze this. A war for what cause? For a 10-year-old girl whose only transgression was her father's lack of fortitude and whose sister became my asset. Dominic seized his coat. This is precisely the outcome I predicted. They test the established boundaries. I respond with total annihilation. Those are the rules of engagement. That engagement is concluded. Seraphina is now a critical variable in every one of your operational plans. If you initiate warfare, she becomes their prime objective. She is already the prime objective. The photograph was confirmation, and this maneuver against her sibling corroborates it. Dominic moved toward the exit. The only method to ensure her security is to generate a terror so absolute they become fearful of the very air she occupies. Alternatively, you could negotiate, establish a compromise with Colombo. There is no compromise with men who weaponize children. Victor is on the channel. Serafina is secure and in transit. She is asking for information. Inform her. I will provide a full briefing upon my arrival. This intelligence will emotionally compromise her. She is already in a state of extreme distress over her sister. Then maintain her containment until I am on site. Dominic was in his vehicle as it accelerated violently from the curb. And locate Marco. I am indifferent to the methods. The transit to the penthouse was a silent, protracted interval. Dominic's cognitive functions fractured, simulating scenarios of failure and catastrophe. He had anticipated this union would create friction, that her family was now a protected asset. But the theoretical danger was incomparable to the raw, visceral impact of a child being targeted. As he entered the apartment, he observed Serafina pacing the area like a captive predator. She pivoted on him as he crossed the threshold. Is Emma secure? They reported she was, but I need to hear her voice. She is unharmed. She is with your parents, under an elevated security protocol. She's unaware of the event that nearly transpired. What do you mean she is unaware? Someone attempted to abduct her. Our operative intercepted the threat before she registered it. To her, it will merely appear that new security is escorting her home. That is all. Serafina became completely motionless. Security. 10-year-olds do not have security. This one does, as does your other sister. This is not happening. Her hands pressed against her temples. This is entirely my fault. I am the cause of this. No. Your father initiated this with commitments he could not fulfill. He used you as a transactional object to conceal his errors and made your sister's tactical leverage. Dominic closed the distance by a single controlled step. None of this is attributable to you, but it is a consequence of my presence. They intend to harm you, so they are using my family as the instrument. That assessment is correct, and I will ensure this is the final attempt they ever make. She met his stare, her eyes a maelstrom of rage and dread. How? By eliminating more individuals, by initiating a conflict that will consume more non-combatants, by creating a boundary so profound that no one would contemplate crossing it. And you are the one who determines where that boundary is drawn? In this environment? Yes. Serafina moved to the window, wrapping her arms around her torso. I must see them. Not at this time. Not until I have 100% certainty that the threat has been neutralized. And when will that occur? When Marco Colombo has been managed. Managed? She spun to confront him. You mean terminated? Articulate it. You are going to terminate him if it is deemed necessary. And what if his termination exacerbates the situation? What if his organization retaliates? What if additional children are placed at risk? They will not be. Not after I have concluded my operation. You cannot guarantee that. I comprehend the dynamics of this existence. Unwavering, brutal force is the sole dialect men like Marco process. To show hesitation now is to signal weakness. To display your family as a vulnerability is to issue an open invitation to attack. Every adversary I possess will perceive a vector to me through the people you value. Serafina was enveloped in a long, oppressive silence. I despise that your analysis is correct. I know. I despise that this barbarism is our only strategic option. That we cannot resolve this like rational human beings. Marco discarded rationality when he dispatched an assassin for a child. As did you. The moment you took a life, the moment you prioritized power over ethics. She raised a hand to halt his objection. I am not defending him. I am stating that you both inhabit a reality where children are collateral damage. where fear is a mechanism and violence is the only mode of communication, and I am positioned between you. Then articulate your desired outcome for me to stand down. So you prefer to wait for them to succeed in abducting Emma on a subsequent attempt? That is not an option. Her emotional control was failing. I do not know what I want. I want my sister safe. I want to cease existing in a state of perpetual fear. In an ideal world, a 10-year-old would not require bodyguards, but we do not occupy that world. No, we do not. So execute your protocol. Protect them. Protect me. Deploy whatever level of violence is necessary. Her voice turned brittle, like fracturing ice. Just do not expect me to endorse the pathology it creates within you. Dominic's device vibrated. It was Victor. We have Marco. He is demanding a direct dialogue with you. I will be there in 20 minutes. He insists on a one-on-one, neutral territory, just you two. Boss, it is an ambush. Likely, but he states he possesses intelligence, information he asserts you require before you declare war. Dominic analyzed the variables. Arrange it, but I require total surveillance. If his biometrics fluctuate, you eliminate him. He severed the link. Serafina was simply staring at him. You are actually planning to meet him? Yes. Is that strategically sound? Not particularly, but I must process what he has to offer. You mean you must assess him face to face while determining whether to terminate him? She saw through the tactical pretense. Yes. In that case, I will accompany you. Absolutely not. Why not? Because it is a high lethality operation. Every day of this existence is a high lethality operation. If I am present, I can observe the event instead of remaining here, simulating infinitely more traumatic scenarios. Serafina, this is not a subject for negotiation. I am informing you. I am going. You insist that I comprehend your world? Then allow me to observe it. In its entirety, not a sanitized version you deem palatable. Dominic's primary impulse was to deny, to secure her in the penthouse for her own safety, but the resolve in her gaze indicated she would merely find an alternate means of being present. And perhaps her point was valid. Perhaps she needed to witness the depravity to understand his operational methods. Fine, but you will remain in the vehicle with Victor. You will not exit. You will not speak. You are designated as an observer only. Agreed. The rendezvous was established at a warehouse in Queens, a derelict building in an industrial wasteland. Dominic arrived with Victor and 2 other operatives. Serafina, an obscured figure in the rear of the SUV. Marco was already on site, positioned against a black sedan with 3 of his own personnel. Remain here, Dominic instructed Serafina, irrespective of what you observe. I will. He exited the vehicle. Marco observed his approach, his expression entirely unreadable. Virelli, I am surprised you appeared. You have 5 minutes to explain why I should not terminate you where you stand. Because I am not the agent who targeted your wife's sister. The statement induced a momentary cognitive paralysis in Dominic. You are fabricating. Am I? Consider it logically. What do I stand to gain by initiating a war with you? You seized my shipping routes, correct? I am angered, but I am not irrational enough to provoke a major conflict over a corridor with such marginal profits. So who directed Danny to target Serafina? Who was the source of the photograph? While Danny was in my employ, he served a secondary client, an entity who required you to perceive me as the threat. Anticipating our mutual destruction would create a power vacuum. The foundation of Dominic's reality began to fracture. Who? Your new father-in-law. The name Aldo struck him with physical force. He has been manipulating both of us from the start. He proposed a pact months ago. I would generate instability, making you appear weak in exchange for the shipping lanes once you were in control. He even implied his daughter was an inside agent. Serafina knows nothing of this. Yes, that is becoming clear. Aldo's strategy was a clinical exercise in treachery. His goal was to overwhelm you with external threats, allowing your marriage to dissolve from your perceived failure to protect her kin, thus invalidating your contract. He could then reclaim his enterprise, and I would be positioned to annex your territory in the ensuing turmoil. Dominic's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles stark white. You have evidence? Marco presented his phone. The screen showed the complete anatomy of the betrayal, messages, locations, and schedules, all from Aldo's secure channel. He dispatched Danny for the photograph to incriminate my crew. Then he engineered the attempt on Serafina to precipitate a war between us. Marco's smile was a sliver of glass. He would allow his own kin to be collateral simply to break your alliance. It was a level of coldness that was jarring, even to men of their disposition, a potent rage built in Dominic's core. Why are you showing me this? I will not be a pawn in another man's conflict, and Aldoval is a malignancy in this world. He needs to be taught about permanence. Marco put away his phone. Let's be unequivocal. We are not allies. We are not. But our war is not a foregone conclusion. Not over this. What is your asking price? I require Aldo's permanent removal from the equation and a minority holding in the shipping lanes. A fee to consider this matter concluded. Dominic analyzed the revelation. His intuition signaled a trap, a sophisticated manipulation by Marco, but the evidence on the screen was irrefutable. The logic was perverse, yet possessed a horrifying coherence. Aldo fit the profile of a man who would offer his own children as sacrificial pawns. I will consider it. Do not take too long. Aldo is already planning his next maneuver. The next time will not be a show of force. The next time a child may genuinely be taken. Dominic turned, striding toward the SUV. Through the tinted window, Serafina's face was an ethereal reflection. He sat beside her. Go. Victor drove away. 3 blocks passed in silence before she spoke. What did he tell you? Dominic took out his phone, his thumb finding Aldo's name. Your father has treated us as instruments. He staged attacks against you to provoke a war between Marco and me. He was trying to destroy our union to regain his empire. No, he would not. Dominic showed her the screen. He watched her composure disintegrate as she processed her father's words, each message a new stratum of deceit. Oh God, her voice broke. He authorized Emma's abduction. He consented to her being harmed just to dispose of me, to void our agreement. But Emma, Sophie, they are his own family. Her hands trembled violently. What sort of creature gambles with the lives of his children? The kind who sees them as assets, as pieces in his strategic game. Dominic took his phone back. I am sorry. Don't be. Not for exposing what he is. I should have known. When he bartered me away, I should have realized his other daughters had no value, that we were never individuals to him. What do you require of me? Her gaze locked with his, and he observed a fundamental shift within her. The fear was replaced by a cold, unyielding resolve. I require you to protect my sisters, genuinely, not from imagined threats, from him, from our father, that would necessitate his removal from the situation. I understand the implications. Her tone was like stone. He will never cease to use us. He will continue to place them in danger. As long as he is alive and feels threatened, Emma and Sophie will never be secure. Serafina, are you asking me to... I am asking you to do what you do best. Neutralize the threat. Her eyes stayed on his, unwavering. I am asking you to kill my father. The statement hung in the air of the car, absolute and irreversible. Dominic searched her face for a hint of hesitation. The girl who had flinched from him 2 weeks ago was gone. In her place was a woman forged by betrayal who understood that kinship could be a poison. You are certain? He sanctioned Emma's abduction. He planned attacks on me. He sold me and then tried to destroy the one decent thing to come of it. You, keeping your word. Her jaw was rigid. I am certain. This is a permanent action. It is not reversible. You will have to live with the knowledge that your husband murdered your father. I already live with the knowledge my father tried to injure his own daughters. This is merely a rebalancing of the scales. Dominic took out his phone, texting a short directive to Victor. It will be made to look accidental. Cardiac event, untraceable to you or your sisters. The specifics of the method are not important, only their safety is. The car came to a stop. They ascended in the elevator, the weight of their packed, a silent third passenger. Inside, Serafina went to the window, a silhouette against the metropolis. I am a monstrous woman. The words were a faint whisper. I just authorized my father's death, and I feel nothing. You are not monstrous. You are protecting people you love by becoming a reflection of you, by choosing violence as the only recourse. You are not like me at all. Am I not? I just engaged in the same cold calculus you do every day, assigning a higher value to one life over another, making force the final arbiter. She turned from the glass. The only thing that distinguishes us is your experience. I chose this. You were conditioned into it. Does our path here change the outcome? The result is the same. My father will die because I willed it. I weighed his life against my sister's, and his was found wanting. Dominic moved toward her but maintained a deliberate distance. If you are waiting for an apology from me, you will be disappointed. That is the fragmented reality of my being. I am not changing my mind. He has to disappear. My sister has to be safe. Her voice faltered, I need this to be over. And if that classifies me as a monster, then that is what I am. You are not a monster. You are a survivor. Is that the narrative you tell yourself after you take a life? After all the destruction and pain, are you simply surviving? Sometimes. The rest of the time, I am precisely what I have always been. A monster. Yes. At last she faced him, and for the first time in 2 weeks, she closed the distance between them. She was near enough for him to register her warmth, to see the gold in her irises. I do not believe you are a monster. You should. I know. But I do not. You have had countless opportunities to harm me, but you refrained. You protected my sisters even when it destabilized your own world. You struggle to be a good man, warring with every lethal impulse you possess. Her hand lifted, slowly, intentionally, giving him a chance to pull away before it came to rest on his cheek. Maybe you are just a man who was never presented with another option. Dominic stayed perfectly still, her touch searing him. It was the first physical contact driven by choice, not by terror or obligation. The first time she had sought proximity rather than creating distance. Serafina, some part of me is still afraid of you. I believe it always will be. But I am beginning to understand. to see how the predatory nature and the person are linked, how you are both brutal and surprisingly gentle, a threat and a shield, that perhaps no one is ever a single, simple thing. What caused this change in you? I saw that my father was the more significant monster. The man who was my guardian would exchange his children for material gain, while you, the embodiment of my childhood fears, showed more humanity in 14 days than he did in 20 years. Her hand fell from his cheek. It inverted my entire definition of a monster. A vibration from Dominic's phone acted as a silent confirmation of death. A message from Victor. Complete. Val's car went off the road on his way home, made contact with a retaining wall. Instantaneous. Tidy, as per the order. Dominic processed the words, their finality settling deep within his bones. He had ended lives, given the commands, taken the shot, and remained unaffected. This was different. This was her father. Whatever kind of man he was, a line had been crossed with no possibility of return. He showed her the screen, watching her eyes absorb the text, watching her grasp that her father was irrevocably gone, and her choice was the very instrument of his end. No tears came, a long, heavy silence, then a single firm nod. Good. How will we inform my sisters? Your mother will handle the logistics. She will contact you tomorrow. It will be framed as a terrible accident. That is the complete narrative. What about the services? You will be in attendance. You will perform the role of a grieving daughter. The public appearance is vital. Public appearance? A sharp, humorless laugh escaped her. My entire existence has been a performance. Be attractive, seem appreciative, act as though my world were not in ruins. I am finished with performances. What do you want then? The truth, regardless of how ugly or how much it pains me. She sank down on the sofa. For Serafina, her father was not a person to be mourned, but a loathsome man who viewed his daughters as assets. His demise was the predictable cost for a man whose fatal pride led him to challenge powers he could not overcome. This was the unvarnished truth she refused to obscure with false grief. When Dominic sat opposite her, the framework of their new reality formed. Your sisters will be sad, he stated. They are young, she countered. They remember an illusion. Let them mourn that phantom. But her eyes met Dominic's, insisting on a more brutal honesty. Aldo was a monster, she said, just a separate species from the man she now faced. When he asked what sort of monster he was, she responded, the kind who never deceived himself about his own nature. You make no attempt to disguise malice as virtue, she observed. Your cruelty is transparent, unlike his avarice, which was cloaked in familial obligation. She assumed a fetal position, verbalizing a paradoxical sense of security in his particular form of psychopathy. A clinical silence permeated the space, bisected by the chiaroscuro of the setting sun. The city's ambient pulse was oblivious to a quiet patricide, the calcification of a subject's psyche, and a dark alliance contractually initiated, evolving into a genuine trauma bond. I should be experiencing psychic collapse, Serafina articulated into the void. Complete fragmentation, yet I only register liberation. Is this a pathological response? He stated he was the wrong subject to consult on ethics. Such concepts are a privilege. All that is real is the drive for self-preservation, to take any action necessary to witness another day. A bleak cognitive filter, she noted. I am the spouse of a syndicate boss who just orchestrated my father's termination, she countered. Bleak seems diagnostically appropriate. A vestige of a smile formed on Dominic's lips, acknowledging her dark rationalization. A necessary coping mechanism in your environment, it seems, she stated. Our environment, he corrected. The pronoun was a persistent stimulus, she noted, reinforcing her outsider status. Yet this was her baseline reality now. The thought had the faint resonance of a binding vow. Those promises, she reflected. She moved to the window. Can this dynamic ever be functional? She asked her reflection. Can we function as spouses without the constant environmental chaos? Objectively? He asked. No, I believe the chaos is the substrate. We originate from incompatible realities, but we might learn to navigate the storm front as a single unit. That presents as far from romantic, she observed. Our initial engagement was devoid of romance, he stated. Why introduce a simulation now? She turned from the glass, her affect toward him visibly softening. The most pronounced cognitive dissonance in all this, she said, is that I am beginning to feel secure with you, not despite the violence, but because of it. I know you would incinerate the world to prevent me harm, that you would commit monstrous acts. Especially monstrous acts, he affirmed. That is not safety, Serafina. It is being the prized acquisition of a highly dangerous individual. Perhaps that is the only definition of safety that has ever existed, she countered. Being valuable enough for protection. Being regarded enough that another is willing to become the monster for you. She closed the physical distance between them on the couch, a clear behavioral marker of their shrinking emotional gap. Thank you, she said, for shielding my sisters, for managing my father, for attempting to make this crisis state tolerable. You are thanking me for eliminating your father, he noted, his tone flat. I am thanking you for fulfilling your contract. There is a distinction. Dominic merely observed her, this subject adapting to his pathological world with a resilience once suited to a normative life, establishing stability on terrain designed for collapse. She met his gaze, assessing both the predator and the person, recoiling from neither. You possess more psychological strength than my initial assessment indicated, he conceded. I am only now discovering it, she replied. When you cease to be phobic, you find you can endure more than you imagined. Even this, simple survival, irrespective of the cost. My father, she recalled, always classified me as weak. Too fragile, too emotional, too naive. My diagnosis is that he was incorrect, Dominic said. Fatally so. Or perhaps, she theorized, this resilience is present only out of necessity, because this environment demands it, because you demonstrated that survival requires amoral choices. She studied him. Is that your etiology? Were you a different person before violence reshaped you? My origin was one of fear and insignificance, he admitted. Violence made me powerful. Once I possessed that power, I resolved never to be weak again. And your current state? I remain powerful, I remain dangerous, but for the first time I have begun to question if that is the sum of my identity. What is the alternative? The question hung in the air between them. Dominic lacked an answer. He had never formulated an alternative construct, never envisioned a life beyond consolidating his empire with fear as his instrument in a perpetual conflict for dominance. But observing Serafina's metamorphosis from a pawn into a more formidable entity, one that would not fracture, he felt the first fissure in his own psychological foundation. A new variable presented itself. He could be a protector without total annihilation. His power could have a function beyond its own perpetuation. A person who might, in time, be deserving of the fragile trust he observed developing in her eyes. "The data is inconclusive," he said finally, "but I am willing to conduct the experiment." She reached out, her hand closing over his. The gesture was minor but significant. Her first initiation of physical contact, not motivated by fear. "Then let us analyze the data together," she proposed. Two damaged subjects attempting to become marginally less so. The potential outcome had to possess some value. Dominic observed their joined hands, her unmarred skin a stark contrast to his scarred knuckles, her nascent hope against his history of violence. The scenario was illogical. Their entire situation was untenable. And yet, it was developing its own internal perverse logic. The funeral was precisely the spectacle Aldo would have desired. Ostentatious, theatrical, and attended by individuals who detested him but performed their social duty. Serafina stood between her mother and Dominic, her face a perfected mask of bereavement. She was performing a role conditioned in her father's household. Emma and Sophie's genuine grief was audible, and the sound of their tears triggered a painful somatic response in Serafina. She experienced zero guilt for her decision, not a single trace. The pain was for a phantom father, an idealized construct that never existed. "Are you maintaining equilibrium?" Dominic's voice was a low frequency, meant only for her. "I am functional. Let us conclude this procedure." After the service, Marcus delivered his scripted condolences, labeling her father a difficult man. Serafina retorted, "That is one descriptor." Feeling no compulsion for civility with someone fully aware of Aldo's pathology, he remarked, "You are managing this with noteworthy composure," she replied. "I've had extensive training in pretending my world wasn't imploding. This is merely another Tuesday." Marcus regarded her with a flicker of reevaluation, stating, "You are more resilient than you appear." Her eyes met Dominic's. "I am learning from a master." Following the interment, the mourners gathered at her mother's home. Catherine delivered a flawless performance as the grieving widow, and the attendees reciprocated in kind. Serafina observed her, calculating the extent of her mother's awareness of Aldo's machinations. Later, her mother cornered her in the kitchen. "Serafina, we must discuss your father's assets, the enterprises. What about them?" "They are liquidated." "The attorneys report your husband now controls nearly everything." The prenuptial agreement granted Dominic total authority. Catherine's composed exterior finally fractured. "We have no remaining assets. The house is heavily mortgaged, the accounts drained. He left us destitute." Serafina registered no empathy. "He received his due." "You could speak with Dominic. You could petition him for aid." "Aid you? After my father attempted to use me as a commodity to incite a war?" Catherine's face lost all color. "What are you saying?" A harsh laugh escaped Serafina. "Father was conspiring with Marco Colombo, arranging attacks on Emma and me to dissolve my marriage and regain his power. He was prepared to sacrifice his own children to escape Dominic's control? No, he would not do that. He did, and Dominic possesses the documentation." Serafina advanced a step, her voice brittle. "So, no, I will not ask my husband to subsidize the family that commodified me, then tried to destroy the sole positive outcome. You are autonomous now, Mother, just as you left me." "I was preparing you for reality." "You were conditioning me to be an object, a possession that would not resist." Serafina's tone was frigid. "And I internalized my lessons perfectly, just not the ones you intended." I learned that kinship is a construct, duty is a cage, and the only individual who actively protects me is the man you conditioned me to fear. Catherine reached for her, but Seraphina recoiled. Do not. You aligned with father. You instructed me to endure when you should have instructed me to rebel. Now you can experience the consequences. She turned and walked directly to Dominic, who processed her expression and understood. We are leaving. He did not ask for a reason, simply extracting them from the toxic environment. In the vehicle, Seraphina finally exhaled. That's severe. My mother requires funds. She believes I should solicit you for a subsidy because father left them with nothing. And your response, he prompted, that it is her problem to solve. My function as their crisis manager is terminated. Dominic processed this in silence. If your intention is to provide for your sisters, my sisters are minors. The contract ensures their welfare. They are secure. But my mother, she made a decision. She will now bear it. You have become colder, he observed. I have become pragmatic. There is a distinction. Her focus was on the passing urban landscape. I had a capable instructor, after all. I am uncertain of that statement's intent. It was not an insult. It is a fact. She turned to face him. Can we please relocate? Not the penthouse. Any location but that one. A location untainted by the current pathology. The specific coordinates were irrelevant, only that it offered breathable air. Dominic redirected the driver to a new site, a public park, a tableau of normative life. On a bench, they assumed the roles of individuals unmarked by violent legacies. I'm still anticipating the guilt, Seraphina stated clinically, for my father for initiating the event. But the affect is null. A component is absent, but its nature is unknown. A typical response. Bereavement is a complex process, even for a loathed object. But is this bereavement, or merely the void where the trauma was? It is likely a synthesis of both. When Dominic positioned his arm along the bench, the very framework of their dynamic was altered. He presented not a narrative of paternal grief, but one of catharsis, a final liberation from duress. This disclosure unlocked the complex architecture of Seraphina's own sorrow. Her grief was not for the individual, but for the paternal archetypes she was denied. In this shared psychic space, her posture softened, and she inclined toward his locus of control, questioning if their trauma was too severe for any functional normalcy. He confirmed that normalcy was never their inheritance. She probed further, questioning the feasibility of escaping their prescribed roles. The world she conceptualized was one of complete reinvention, new identities in a geography free of their history. Dominic, a product of that exact history, dismissed it as a comforting delusion. Yet she clung to the ideation's appeal. Her query about him renouncing his identity struck at the core of their conflict. His stark admission confirmed his entrapment. His entire construct of self was built on that foundation, and he could not conceive of an alternative. He did concede, however, that she had introduced a novel paradigm, the possibility of a world beyond the calculus of dominance and fear. Her question, what else exists, remained suspended between them. Their detached observation of a normative couple was akin to ethnographers studying a culture they could never join. Seraphina then reverted to the immediate future, announcing her acceptance to a New York University education program. To him, it was a positive development. To her, the simple act of desire, of planning beyond mere survival, was profoundly disorienting. She verbalized the psychological trauma of her new reality. A month prior, her sole objective was death avoidance. Now she was constructing a future. The sensation was alien, containing a hope that registered as a threat. In her schema, hope was a vector for further loss, a vulnerability to be exploited. He countered that not all things are expropriated, but her conditioning taught her otherwise. Security, innocence, attachments. This reality was a relentless thief. Dominic could offer no rebuttal to this core belief. The remaining variable was how to confront it, with passive acceptance or defiance. Perhaps, she posited, the only objective was to construct things, despite the certainty of their demolition. The inquiry then focused on their dyad. Were they co-constructing something, or were they two traumatized subjects sharing a debris field? He deflected, requesting her assessment. She characterized it as a delicate negotiation, learning to coexist without mutual annihilation. Her previous animosity had dissipated, supplanted by the realization that he was not the monster of her projections. When he asked for her diagnosis, she described a complex subject, lethal but not sadistic, violent but with logic, possessing immense darkness, and also a capacity for genuine solicitude. She perceived past his strategic framing that she and her sisters were assets requiring protection to the more fragile affect it masked. It was a vulnerability he could not conceal from her. Confronted with her insight, the defenses he maintained for 2 decades began to collapse. He confessed the truth. The cognitive shift, he stated, occurred during the acute stress of their union, between her trauma on their wedding night and her resolve in condemning her father. In that crucible, she ceased to be a contractual obligation. Her reply was clinical. That is hardly a romantic formulation. They concurred on the complete negation of romance, a shared understanding that elicited a rare, authentic smile from her. Theirs was no idealized narrative. It was another construct, possibly more durable, engineered for their fractured reality. In the subsequent weeks, their shared existence established a new rhythm. The apartment, once a sterile enclosure, was now animated by the intellectual energy of Serafina's academic life. She would return discussing pedagogical theory and the children she mentored, integrating the external world into their gilded containment. Dominic's role began to shift from silent observer to engaged participant. He found himself captivated, not by financial data, but by the intensity of her new purpose. This was a profound reorientation. His office, the seat of his power, now felt sepulchral, and he started to depart early, not from obligation, but from a simple drive to be in her proximity. He would inquire about her day, his interest authentic. Then, approximately 6 weeks post Aldo's funeral, Serafina entered his study, proposing she could sit with him silently as he worked. Her own quarters, she conceded, felt excessively vacant. He granted the request without a word. She occupied the couch, and a therapeutic silence permeated the room. An hour later, he observed she was asleep, a book on her chest, her features relaxed in a way he never witnessed consciously. The logical action was to rouse her. He chose instead to drape a blanket over her, and her presence transmuted the sterile office into a sanctuary. He fell asleep on the opposing couch, a quiescent guardian. She discovered him in that position upon waking. Her question about why he had stayed was met with a simple, potent response. He hadn't wanted her to experience solitude. The admission registered to her as the most profound act of care she had ever received. He dismissed it as a low threshold for kindness, and she concurred with a faint smile, accepting the gesture's warmth. Following this, the final barriers between them began to erode. Minor intimacies, his hand on her lower back, Her shifting closer at meals became normalized. Even her laugh, a rare vocalization, began to manifest, triggered by his morbid wit. He was drawn further into her sphere as they assembled a shared existence, but their environment is predatory and unforgiving. The unavoidable rupture arrived as a Tuesday summons from Victor, his voice tight with alarm. A Red Hook warehouse had been compromised. 2 men were neutralized, and $500,000 in assets had vanished. As Dominic prepared to deploy, Serafina stood before him, her anxiety now deeply personalized. She challenged his belief in his own invulnerability, demanding not hubris but genuine caution. The intensity in her gaze compelled his honest assent. The warehouse presented a scene of tactical violence. The bodies were concealed, the surveillance data erased. This was the execution of skilled operatives, not common criminals. Dominic's primary query was of attribution. Victor confirmed the obvious. The incursion was surgical, presupposing intimate knowledge of their security protocols. The compromise had to originate from within their own organization. 15 minutes later, Marcus arrived, articulating the strategic threat. A loss of this scale projected weakness. The directive was clear: identify the traitors and make a public example of them. The order was given to reinforce all positions and to trust no one. For 3 days, Dominic immersed himself in the city's underworld, hunting an unknown subject. The truth upon its discovery was a visceral betrayal. The infiltrator was Tommy Ricci, a subordinate at his side for 8 years. Tommy was perceived as a loyal operative, one of the very few men in whom Dominic placed unconditional trust. He required verification. Victor presented footage of Tommy meeting with the buyers. The motive apparently was a loan Dominic had denied 6 months prior. He had a vague recollection of the meeting. Tommy's daughter required an expensive, experimental treatment for a rare condition. Viewing it as a purely financial equation, Dominic had assessed it as a poor investment and rejected the request. The consequence of that detached calculation was now evident: betrayal and the termination of 2 loyal men. His former self would have ordered a swift public execution. But now, a novel impulse caused him to pause. He requested Tommy's location and went to confront the man, discovering him injured in a cold, damp basement. Upon seeing his superior, Tommy's defiance collapsed into a cascade of desperate appeals. Dominic silenced him, asking if he genuinely believed he could evade the consequences. Tommy cited his desperation, his terminally ill daughter. The treatment was $300,000, and with his request for aid denied, he perceived no other option. He confessed the transgression, but framed it as the necessary act of a father unable to witness his 8-year-old child expire. The words impacted Dominic with physical intensity. A month ago, he would have terminated him without deliberation. But now he pictured Serafina's face and understood the impossible dilemmas of those cornered by circumstance. You were obligated to make a second appeal, a formal report on the situation. It was a crisis. I made 3 attempts. Your aide reported you were unavailable. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Tommy had not been passive. Lacking other options, he had chosen a desperate course. The men you neutralized, they were individuals. I am aware, Tommy whispered, his voice faint. That is a debt I will bear forever. But my daughter was dying, and she is my entire reality. Dominic retrieved his phone and initiated a call. What is the cost for the treatment Tommy Ricci's daughter requires? $300,000. Wire the full amount to the hospital immediately. Tommy could only stare, disoriented. What are you? Your child receives her treatment. You are permitted to live, but you are expunged from this city. You will vanish. You are to begin a new existence and must not return. Should I detect your presence in my city hereafter, I will conclude the work I began tonight. Is that clear? I don't understand. Why? Because I am attempting to become a man other than my former self. Because my wife has shown me that mercy is not synonymous with weakness. Because you are a father who made a terrible decision to protect his child, and I cannot punish that act without becoming the monster of their narrative. Dominic signaled to Victor, "Release him. Ensure his family is gone by dawn. Boss, execute the order." Victor complied, but his expression suggested Dominic had finally fractured. Perhaps he had. In their world, compassion was merely a clinical term for insanity, but Dominic had grown weary of being a man whose primary function was demolition. When he returned home, Serafina was present. A single observation of his state confirmed a psychological break had occurred. "Report." And so, he did. He recounted the case of Tommy, the breach of loyalty, and the final disposition he had issued. She processed the information, her gaze fixed on his, and upon his conclusion, she closed the physical distance between them, enveloping him in an embrace. It was the first instance of her initiating such contact, the first time she provided comfort rather than merely receiving his protection. For a moment, Dominic's posture was rigid with shock before he slowly, uncertainly, reciprocated the embrace. "Your decision was correct," she murmured against his chest. "Was it? I allowed a traitor who stole from me to simply walk free. Who eliminated my personnel? That does not make me correct. It makes me vulnerable." "No," she countered. "It makes you human. It makes you a man who grasps that individuals are not figures on a ledger, but are broken, desperate organisms struggling for survival." She pulled back enough to meet his gaze. "It makes you someone I believe I could genuinely learn to love in time." That word, love, occupied the space between them, immense and threatening. They had never spoken it, never risked approaching it. But now it was present, fragile, tangible. "In time," he echoed, his voice strained. "I am not there yet. I am still analyzing you, still determining if this is authentic. But I believe it could be. Someday, if we maintain this trajectory, if you remain this person, not the one you are conditioned to be. What if I cannot sustain this change? What if that deviant returns for a second engagement? Then he will be forced to contend with me. But my hypothesis is that he will not. I observe you evolving, perhaps not instantaneously, perhaps with errors. But it is sufficient. It is enough for me to project a future beyond mere survival." Dominic drew her close again, sensing her capitulation to his hold. "I have no operational model for this," he conceded. "How to be with another person, how to care, and not classify it as a liability." "I do not either." "Then we will acquire the skills together. We will experience failure, and we will correct it. Then we will discover new methods of failure. It is the human condition." "But what if I inflict pain upon you? Not with my hands, but with my very nature. Then I will experience pain, and we will confront it. But your efforts already exceed those of anyone in my past, and the attempt is more valuable than perfection." In the room's center, they simply held one another. Two damaged subjects learning to achieve integration together. This was not a fable, no adolescent romance, but something visceral, authentic, and founded on a substrate far stronger than fantasy. The contract that initiated their arrangement was lost in a file, its legal terminology a faint artifact. What they were constructing now was not made of ink, but of volition, a difficult, chaotic, and beautifully flawed decision. In the months that followed, they continued the construction. Serafina obtained her degree, then her teaching credentials, securing a position at the school where she had previously volunteered. She would return home, depleted but luminous, marked with glitter and ink, to debrief Dominic on 6-year-olds who had finally decoded their first words. As he processed her reports, a pride for her developed in his psyche that was unrelated to ownership. He began the monumental task of reorienting his business without liquidating it entirely. He was not naive enough to believe he could simply sever his ties to that world, but he began altering its vector, diverting funds from illicit enterprises into legitimate ones, wielding his power as a shield instead of a weapon. The entire operation was a slow, brutal conflict against relentless hostiles. But Victor remained loyal, and Marcus helped him navigate the violent new course. Gradually, the organization began to resemble less a syndicate and more a damaged but potent force for social good. For a period when Catherine's world disintegrated, Serafina's sisters resided in the penthouse. Emma and Sophie inundated the sterile apartment with loud, adolescent energy, and Dominic was surprised to discover he tolerated the chaos. He was drawn into assisting with schoolwork, learned the alien dynamics of middle school, and assumed the role of the uncle they desperately required. When Catherine finally reached her nadir, intoxicated, broken, and utterly isolated, it was Serafina who extended mercy. It was not forgiveness, nor was it reconciliation, but it was sufficient to admit her to a treatment center. It was sufficient to preserve her life. In their ecosystem, this was mercy, not erasing the past, but choosing not to annihilate the future. 1 year after their wedding, the marital contract came up for review. The lawyers presented it to Dominic, dense with clauses for renewal and modification. He examined the document, his thoughts saturated with the events that had transpired since he first signed it. Then, he tore it into fragments. His lawyer observed him, utterly stupefied. "What are you doing?" The act invalidated every clause, terminating the contract. "The shipping lanes, the territory, they are mine, with or without her. I do not require a document to secure what I have built." Dominic rose to his feet. "Prepare the dissolution agreement, a clean severance. You are divorcing her. I am giving her an option. She was never afforded one before. She will receive one now." He went home that evening with the papers in his briefcase. He found Serafina at the kitchen table, engrossed in grading student work. She looked up at his entry. "You appear grim. Is there a problem?" "Nothing is wrong, but a discussion is required." He placed the documents on the table. "Our marriage agreement was due for renewal. I have voided it." All color receded from her face. You wish to terminate this?" "No, I am transferring that power to you. The contract that ensnared you is gone. You are at liberty to depart should you wish. There will be no conditions, no retribution. Your sisters will be protected. You will be provided for, but you will be free." Serafina stared at the documents as if they were venomous. "Why are you taking this action?" "Because you never had a choice. Your father bartered you away, and while we have built something functional from it, it began without your consent. Now the decision is yours. You can opt to remain, or you can opt to leave. Whichever course you choose, it will be your decision alone. And if I depart, then you depart. I will not impede you. I will not create complications. You have earned the right to your own existence. She picked up the papers, her eyes scanning the legal language. Dominic merely observed, witnessing the internal conflict as she processed the freedom he was offering. Finally, she set them down. I am not signing these, Dominic. Her tone was like steel. I am not signing them because I do not want a dissolution. I want to remain here, not because a document dictates it, but because I am choosing to, because what we have constructed is significant to me, because you are significant to me. She rose and moved around the table until she stood directly before him. I love you. I cannot specify the precise moment of onset. Perhaps it was somewhere between you dismantling my father's world and you sparing Tommy Ritchie. But it is a fact. I love you, and I choose to be your wife, your partner, not your captive. Dominic felt a final internal barrier disintegrate, a defense mechanism he hadn't known still existed. I love you too, he admitted. I have no protocol for executing this correctly. I will likely make constant errors, but I love you more than I ever deemed possible. It was then she kissed him for the first authentic time. Not the hollow gesture from their wedding, but a kiss born of a potent choice. He reciprocated with a quiet reverence, holding her as if she were a sacred object. This was no assertion of ownership. As their contact ceased, tears traced paths down her face, products of elation, not the familiar stimulus of fear or grief. Is this our protocol, then? Mutually choosing this? If you will accept me, he stated, his voice low, knowing a darkness exists in me that will never be fully eradicated. I am not seeking perfection. I want you, the fractured components and the ones attempting to heal, nothing less. Then you shall have the totality of me. They remained there, suspended in the quiet turbulence of the kitchen, surrounded by schoolwork and contracts now rendered obsolete. A man and a woman, spawned from a sterile agreement, had manifested something genuine. This was a narrative no one would have ever composed for them. What they possessed defied romantic convention. It was a topography they had engineered for themselves. It was volatile and unrefined, predicated on brutal honesty rather than elegant fictions. That night, the world reoriented. For the first time since being legally bound, Serafina did not retreat to the isolation of her own room. Instead, she took his hand, leading him toward a chamber that would now be a shared space. Their union was methodical and tender, the climax of a year spent establishing fragile trust. The artifacts of her past trauma remained, flickers of old fear, and he had to suppress the man he had been. Yet because it was authentic and freely given, it held more value than any perfect deception. Her voice, a soft query in the dark, located him as they lay together. Do you have regrets about the contract, about our beginning? He responded to her inquiry with the clinical candor that now governed their dynamic. My only regret is the collateral damage to you, the duress, your loss of autonomy, your father's actions. But I cannot regret the sequence of events that led to this outcome, to this, to you. And I to you, she echoed, a classic reciprocation. It was a nightmare, but I cannot regret it. The trauma conditioned me to be strong enough to identify and pursue my objectives. Someone who could engage with a dangerous subject and not suffer a psychological break. Is that your current assessment? Engaging with a dangerous subject? Precisely. And you are engaging with a woman conditioned to be dangerous herself. This appears to be our function for one another. We escalate each other's strengths, never their weaknesses. Correct, he affirmed, the word a final diagnosis. It is. Unconsciousness claimed them in physical enmeshment, a profound, stable state not experienced since the initial incident. No past traumas intruded, only the regulated comfort of two subjects who had confronted external threats and selected one another. The subsequent years presented a chronic stress test. Pathological elements from Dominic's history, former adversaries, unresolved conflicts, the persistent threat of aggression, refused to remain dormant. Yet they confronted each crisis as a single unit. Serafina applied the rigid resolve of an educator to his world of antisocial behavior. He, in turn, learned to prioritize her security over his innate compulsion for control. They clashed frequently, mapping the boundaries of their individual psyches and learning to communicate through conflict. Their offspring, Emma and Sophie, were raised within a fortress of affection, shielded from the clinical realities of Dominic's life and their grandfather's pathology. For the children, the environment was simplified. Serafina exhibited contentment. Dominic was integrated into the family unit, and they had achieved a state of security. He commenced the deconstruction of his previous enterprise, reestablishing his organization with a veneer of legitimacy. A complete decontamination was not feasible. Certain psychopathic markers are indelible, but it was sufficient to provide him with a measure of equilibrium, and for her to observe a subject gravitating toward prosocial behavior, not one fixated on predation. For their 5-year anniversary, Dominic returned her to the park where they had stood following her father's interment. They occupied the same bench, observing the water. 5 years passed and 2 lives fundamentally altered. Then Serafina broke the silence. "Do you recall our discourse at this location? You inquired if I would ever simply vanish, initiate a new life elsewhere. And what is your conclusion now?" He gave the query its due clinical consideration. "No, not any longer. This existence is a shared construct. It is dysfunctional and chaotic and hazardous, but it is ours. I have no desire to flee from it. I wish to continue its development." "As do I." She rested her head on his shoulder, a simple, comforting gesture that would have been impossible during the initial traumatic event. "We performed adequately, did we not? For 2 individuals who originated as a transactional arrangement. Better than adequately. We constructed something functional from the remnants of a crisis. That is not an insignificant achievement." "No," she whispered. "It's the primary variable." They remained until the ambient light diminished, mirroring their vigil 5 years prior. But upon leaving, they were returning home together, not to a containment facility, but to a life of their own design, a contract of ink sublimated onto their psyches. Their outcome, it must be noted, was not a fairy tale narrative. There was no ideal resolution, only 2 traumatized individuals developing an attachment within the ruins of their histories. They had successfully transmuted a contract born of duress into a bond of their own making, one both potent and authentic. In a system predicated on power, aggression, and betrayal, this constituted the ultimate behavioral anomaly. Dominic Varley operated under a brutal paradigm. Power was paramount. Empathy was a vulnerability, and emotional attachment was a liability. Serafina Vale, conversely, had survived by internalizing her role as an instrument, believing safety was found in obscurity, and that affection inevitably resulted in trauma. When their worlds intersected, these core beliefs were systematically deconstructed. They learned that functional strength is found in mutual vulnerability, that forbearance requires more fortitude than aggression, and that a true bond necessitates total awareness. It is the observation of a subject's deepest pathologies and most aberrant moments, followed by the conscious choice to remain. The document that initiated their interaction is now a worthless artifact from a former life. But their bond persists, maintained not by a signature, but by a shared volition. And that singular choice, reaffirmed daily in minor interactions and major stress tests, possesses a value no legal instrument could ever quantify.
Life lesson. The cruelest betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from the people who call exploitation love and expect gratitude for surviving it. This story hurts because it refuses to let anyone hide behind the obvious villain. On paper, the villain should be easy to identify. It should be Dominic, the mafia boss. The man with bloody hands, quiet threats, dead men in warehouses, and enough power to make entire families disappear. Done. Simple. Roll credits. But that is not where the emotional knife goes in. The real knife goes in when the audience realizes that the most dangerous person in Serafina's life was never the man she was forced to marry. It was the father who raised her to believe she should accept being sold. That is the nasty little emotional ambush at the center of the story. Serafina does not begin by fearing evil in general. She fears exactly what her family taught her to fear. They prepare her body for obedience before Dominic even speaks to her. Think about how twisted that is. The first prison is not his penthouse. The first prison is her upbringing. Long before the contract, she has already been told that good daughters absorb pain quietly, that family survival is her responsibility, that protest is selfish, that resistance is disloyal. By the time she walks down the aisle, the chains are already internal. So here comes the first brutal lesson. The worst cages are the ones that teach a person to police herself. That is why this story lands so hard emotionally. Serafina is not just trapped externally. She has been trained to cooperate with her own erasure, and if that sounds extreme, that is because it is. But it is also painfully real in the way many people are taught to confuse self-sacrifice with virtue. Smile through it, endure it, be mature, keep the peace, protect the family, and then everybody acts shocked when the person finally breaks. Meanwhile, Dominic, the walking red flag in a tailored suit, becomes the one person who keeps asking the forbidden question, what if she does not owe everyone her suffering? That question changes the entire story. Now here is where the script twists the knife even deeper. Dominic is not redeemed because he is soft. He is not suddenly a saint. He remains dangerous, violent, morally contaminated. The story does not insult the audience by pretending otherwise, but when Serafina's terror confronts him, he starts doing something incredibly rare in dark romance or mafia narratives. He stops treating legal permission as moral permission. That distinction is everything. The contract says he can. Her family assumes he will. The genre almost expects it, and he says no. That no is where the whole emotional geometry shifts, because the story quietly argues something radical. Just because a person has the power to take does not mean taking is their only language. A lot of people never learn that, some because they are never taught, others because power makes forgetting convenient. Then there is Aldo, the father. Honestly, this man is one of the nastiest kinds of villain because he hides behind family language. He does not scream monster. He says duty. He does not say I sold my daughter. He says this is the only way. He does not say I am sacrificing my child for my own cowardice. He says we must protect the family. That is the emotional fraud of it. He launders greed through morality. And that leads to the second lesson. When someone benefits from your silence, your suffering is not their sacrifice. It is their strategy. Serafina's awakening is so painful because it is not just about fear, it is about humiliation. She realizes that her love for her family was real, but their love for her was conditional, transactional, useful. That kind of realization does not just break the heart, it humiliates the heart. It makes a person question every memory, every dinner, every conversation, we're doing this for your own good. That is why the later scenes hit so hard when she stops defending her father. She is not becoming cold, she is becoming accurate. And accuracy in stories like this feels almost violent. The script also does something clever with Dominic's transformation. It never lets him become harmless because harmless is not the point. The point is choice. He keeps being the kind of man who can ruin cities, but he starts choosing where not to ruin. He protects her sisters. He gives Serafina her own room. He asks about boundaries. He begins to care in ways that inconvenience him. That matters because real care is always inconvenient. Possession is easy. Protection is expensive. Control is simple. Respect takes discipline. That is the third lesson. Love starts where convenience ends. And then the story gets even meaner, because just when Serafina begins to imagine some version of stability, the father betrays them again. Not metaphorically, literally. He is willing to risk his younger daughters too. That is the moment the audience stops asking whether he is redeemable and starts understanding why Serafina makes the choice she makes. It is horrible. It is morally dark. It is tragic, but it is legible. Because once a parent becomes a threat to their own children, family stops being sacred and starts being operational. This is where the story punches out its biggest lesson. Sometimes the person destroying your life is not confused, wounded, or trying their best. Sometimes they know exactly what they are doing, and survival begins when you stop romanticizing their motives. That truth wrecks people because romanticizing harmful parents is one of the last illusions to die. Now let us talk about the real emotional nuke. The audience expects the line, "I'm safe with you," to mean the dangerous man has become good. But that is not what Serafina means. She feels safe with Dominic partly because he is still dangerous, that is ugly, complicated, morally messy, and totally consistent with the world of the story. She is not choosing a peaceful world. She is choosing to stand on the protected side of violence rather than remain exposed to the unprotected side of exploitation. Is that healthy? Not in any neat textbook sense. Is it honest? Completely. And that honesty gives us another lesson. Sometimes healing does not begin with purity. Sometimes it begins with choosing the lesser cruelty, the first honest ally, the first place where fear is not being actively harvested. That sounds grim because it is grim, but it is also how a lot of real people rebuild their lives. Not by leaping from darkness to sunlight in one scene, but by moving from one kind of danger to one kind of honesty and then slowly building something human there. By the time Dominic dissolves the contract and gives Serafina the option to leave, the story finally arrives at the emotional point it was driving toward all along. Freedom is the only thing that can make love morally real. Before that, everything is contaminated by power imbalance. After that, choice enters the room, and once choice enters, love can finally stand upright instead of crawling in from captivity. That is the final lesson, and it is the one that stays with the audience long after the plot ends. Real love is not proven by how tightly someone holds on. It is proven by whether they can open the door and still be chosen. That is why the story works, not because it is clean, not because it is aspirational, not because anyone in it is innocent. It works because it understands a cruel human truth. The people who hurt us most are often the ones who taught us to call hurt by another name. And the people who save us are not always saints. Sometimes they are just the first ones who stop asking us to disappear.